Hey there. Tonight we're exploring the sweet history of the American candy heart. What you're about to discover is that those tiny love notes began as 19th century apothecary lozenges, later stamped with red dye. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. America's most famous love note tastes like chalk and survives the apocalypse. The American candy heart has been breaking teeth and warming souls for more than a century, and the plot twist is delicious. The thing that taught generations to say, "Be mine," started with a Boston pharmacist and a machine built for pills. His name lands with a Victorian thump. Oliver R. Chase. In 1847, in Boston's North End, he engineered a hand-cranked contraption to press medicated lozenges out of sugar paste. Pharmacies needed consistent sizes and dosages. Human hands were messy and slow. The machine looked like a cross between a pasta roller and a printing press, and it changed candy history. Historians at the Smithsonian and the company's own archives loved this origin story, and for once the corporate lore actually tracks. A pill machine birthed a candy empire. Industrial America connected romance and sugar with suspicious speed. Also in Massachusetts, in 1847, Esther Howland of Worcester kicked off a boom in fancy lace-covered Valentine's Day cards. The post office had just gotten efficient enough to make this sort of thing go national. Hand-cut doilies and velvet ribbons in Worcester. Precision sugar-tabled cutting in Boston. One state made the stationery of love. The other figured out how to make it edible. Chase ditched full-time pharmacy and pivoted to candy. He and his brother Daniel formed Chase & Company, turning lozenge tech into confections. One of the earliest hits was a flat, disc-like candy that eventually took the name Necco wafers. Those wafers traveled well and kept forever. Civil War quartermasters liked that sort of reliability, and period accounts say Union soldiers carried them. The company later bragged that its wafers rode along with American troops from the Civil War through World War II. Soldiers needed calories that did not melt in the summer or freeze rock hard in the winter. Romance rarely comes up in procurement memos, but the infrastructure for it was being built. Meanwhile, mid-19th century sweet talk grew more literal. The Victorians loved mottos. In Britain, firms sold conversation lozenges, embossed with little phrases. America looked at that trend and did what it loves doing. It mechanized and scaled it. Daniel Chase, the brother with showman energy, found a way around 1866 to print directly onto candy with food coloring. He reportedly used a felt roller and vegetable dye to stamp words onto sugar. No fiddly embossing dyes, no paper slips, direct to lozenge printing. Daniel basically invented the tweet, only edible and far more permanent than the average app. The first American conversation candies were not tiny hearts. They were big, saucer-like tablets in quirky shapes called cockles that looked like shells. The candies were large enough to hold full sentence wisdom. Gilded Age advice made it onto sugar, the way bumper stickers covered 1990s. Sedans, slogans like "Married in white, you have chosen right," "Married in satin, love will not be lasting." That one came with the Puritan side-eye baked right in. Some were marriage proposals without punctuation or nuance. Another classic kept it brisk and needy. "How long shall I have to wait? Please be considerate." These appeared on early Chase candies in the late 1800s, backed up by trade catalogs and quoted in period newspapers. This was not subtle. Victorians sometimes brought these candies to weddings, the way modern guests bring sparklers and an Instagram strategy. The hearts were not the main shape yet. Doves, horseshoes, even baseballs found their way into the mix, because nothing said eternal commitment like a sugar baseball screaming, "Be true." Then the merger happened, and the modern brand took shape. In 1901, 3 Boston-area candy companies merged to form the New England Confectionery Company, Necco for short. Chase & Company was one of those pillars, and the newly formed giant promptly did what giants do. It standardized, advertised, and expanded. By about 1902, Necco rolled out smaller, heart-shaped candies with shorter sayings. The company called them Sweethearts, and American Valentine's Day suddenly had a mass-market mascot. Heart shape, pastel colors, messages that even the shy could deliver without stammering. Kiss me. Be mine. True love. That compact design solved a cultural problem. Not everyone pushes verse like a Bronte. Not everyone deploys charisma like a Gilded Age railroad baron. The sugar hearts did the talking. The candy itself followed a simple formula. Ground sugar and corn syrup formed a pliable dough, stabilized with gelatin or gum, flavored and tinted in pale pastels. Factories mixed massive kettles of batch after batch. The dough was rolled into sheets, cutters stamped out hearts, and Daniel's old idea, printing ink on candy, kept humming along in more modern form. Food-safe dye, rubber-like stamping heads, and a conveyor that looked like a sugar-themed airport security line. The hearts dried to that signature chalky snap. Chemically speaking, this was less chocolate and more edible sidewalk. The charm came from that texture. It did not smear lipstick at a school dance. It did not melt on the back seat of a 1957 Chevy. It behaved. The Cambridge, Massachusetts plant became a landmark. Necco built a sprawling factory on Massachusetts Avenue in 1927. And for decades, the neon on the water tower glowed over Route 2. Company law loved to call it the world's largest candy factory. The exact title was always slippery, but the scale was real. Wafers, mints, Clark bars, and yes, mountains of hearts. By mid-century, sweethearts were no longer a novelty. They were a seasonal certainty. Even wartime rationing could not fully kill the vibe. Sugar controls during World War II throttled production, and many candies disappeared completely for stretches. Necco pivoted to whatever it could legally make and ship. Post-war, the plant returned to full throttle, and February displays in pharmacies and 5 and dimes stacked up heart boxes like pastel sandbags. The hearts stuck around because they fit a particular American habit. Seasonal sugar plus standardized format equals tradition. Halloween got candy corn. Easter got marshmallow chicks. Valentine's Day got hearts with instructions on them. The United States Congress did not need to issue a proclamation. Children learned the system in elementary school, sorting little pink, yellow, green, white, orange, and purple tablets across desks covered in construction paper. 1 heart for the crush. 1 heart for the friend. 1 for the teacher. None for the kid who once threw a kickball at someone's head. Cherish, but in pastels. Volume ballooned. Company reps like to brag that nearly 8 billion conversation hearts got made for a single season by the early 2000s. That figure shows up in the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and a parade of local news factory tours. They were not winging it. Production ran nearly year-round because demand compressed into 6 weeks. It took roughly 11 months to make enough for February. A surprisingly high number of adult relationships rested on machines running in July. The sayings kept pace with culture because they had to. Short, flirty commands and pet names, lived on sugar because that was the brand. Yet language changes, sometimes overnight. Sweethearts bent to the times while pretending to stay timeless. The company's archives and press releases show this iterative process. Fax me in the 1990s. Email me by the late 90s. Text me in the 2000s. Tweet me around 2010. Girl power made a cameo. Say yes popped up in decades where proposals became a spectator sport. Spanish language assortments arrived in the 2000s with Te Amo and Besame. Heart started echoing emoji culture by the mid-2010s. If the Oxford English Dictionary updated itself every December, so did a server farm in Revere, Massachusetts. Flavors did their own political dance. The canonical set leaned into gently medicinal, a wink back to the candy's apothecary roots. Banana in yellow, wintergreen or peppermint in white or pink, orange in orange, lemon or lime in green, cherry or strawberry in pink or red, grape in purple. People loved to complain and then keep eating. In 2009, Necco tried to modernize with all natural colors and new flavors. The shift won praise from some food writers and a wall of mockery from chalk traditionalists. By the next season, the company tweaked again, balancing old-school wintergreen fans with a public that had discovered green apple everything. A lesson got logged. Romance likes novelty, but nostalgia sells more bags. Misconceptions grew into family lore because the candy had been around so long. The Civil War did not feature conversation hearts as battlefield rations. The timeline makes that obvious. The printing method existed in the late 1860s, and the smaller heart shape landed decades later. Soldiers chomped on wafers, not hearts told to kiss me. Another myth held that the hearts started as a way to use leftover Necco wafer dough. Cute. Wrong. They share a recipe family, but the conversation heart process stands on its own assembly line. There is also the idea that the Victorian phrases were all wholesome. Newspapers and candy trade books from the late 1800s contradict that fantasy. Some mottos were nags. Others were proposals that applied structural pressure. Many read like the ancestor of a mid-century motivational poster. The Victorians invented the subtweet without the internet. Across the Atlantic, a cousin grew up under a different name. In 1954, the British firm Swizzles Matlow introduced love hearts, fruitier and crisper than their American cousins, with raised letters instead of printed ink. The UK version wears 1990s slang, like My Boy, It's Love, on throwback packs that feel like a mod revival. Same concept, different vibe. Even there, American sweethearts cast a long shadow, showing up in British rom-com props whenever a set decorator wanted a heartfelt cliché with pastel credibility. The hearts did their most underrated work inside cafeterias and at office cubicles. They streamlined the performance of affection. One little sugar rectangle on a co-worker's desk said nice job without HR problems. A bag in a bowl on the receptionist's counter leveled the social field with a sugar tax. Everyone grabbed one, everyone read a message, and everyone played the game again next February. Economy of language, scalable sentiment, a corporate offsite with sprinkles. The factory tour footage that local news stations loved around 2010 shows the process with nerdy detail. Powdered cane sugar and corn syrup enter a mixing kettle the size of a compact car. Mechanical paddles fold the slurry until it looks like dough more than liquid. Workers or a dosing system add flavor concentrates and color in measured grams per batch. The mass is deposited onto belt lines, rolled out by calibrated rollers to around 5 millimeters thick, then cut into hearts by rotary dies. Immediately afterward, stamping heads apply the messages with red or purple food dye. Freshly stamped pieces slide into trays for controlled drying, often 24 hours or longer. Relative humidity matters. Drying too fast cracks the candy. Too slow turns it into a sticky slurry. After curing, the hearts tumble in drums to knock off crumbs and then flow into form-fill-seal machines that spit out 1-ounce boxes or heavier bags at a terrifying clip. Food engineers talk about this like watchmakers swap notes, only stickier. The entire process hums along for months to meet a 6-week carnival that ends on February 14th. Then the plot swerved into corporate melodrama. Mecco had been a survivor. It had outlived sugar wars, fashion shifts, low-carb crazes, and 3 waves of yuppies who preferred dark chocolate with 88% cacao. But leverage and real estate can kill a century-old company faster than any diet trend. In April 2018, New England confectionery company all but collapsed under financial strain. Round Hill Investments snapped up the assets in May. Fans lined up outside the Revere plant with the loyalty of concert diehards, buying cases of wafers and sweethearts, like they were bagging vinyl before a fire sale. 2 months later, the factory locked its doors. Employees found out by news alert and guardrail. The building went dark. Just like that, the heart of Valentine's Day flatlined. The timing was spectacularly painful. Retailers place Valentine's orders months in advance. No factory meant no hearts for 2019. Candy nerds freaked out on cue. The New York Times ran a piece that winter about the yawning sweethearts-shaped hole on drugstore shelves. Bags hit eBay and resold like discontinued sneakers, because nothing says true love like a 14-ounce bag of slightly stale pastel discs. Then the revival arc started. In September 2018, the Spangler Candy Company, an Ohio outfit famous for dum-dums and circus peanuts, bought the Sweethearts brand at a bankruptcy auction. Equipment needed to be rescued, refurbished, and coaxed into production, and anyone who has ever dealt with specialty industrial printers and understood that this meant pain. For 2019, no hearts. Production resumed in 2020 with a new home base in Bryan, Ohio, and an old set of problems. The candies tasted like sweethearts. The texture returned. The printing did not. Social feeds lit up with ghostly blank hearts and mangled messages. People treated misprints like collector error cards. Some used the blanks to project the mood of an entire year. The company explained that the veteran stamping machines needed more tuning and upgrades. By 2021 and 2022, the lettering sharpened, the supply improved, and the sweethearts found their way back into end caps and lunch bins without drama. The soap opera arc closed nicely. Dead, resurrected, imperfect, stronger. Even during the crisis years, rival brands kept the ritual alive. Brax, owned by Ferrara, churned out its own conversation hearts with different flavors and a slightly more satiny texture. Sweethearts Hearts took the chalk out entirely, going tart and hard candy bright, like a mid-century diner sign. Boutique makers launched micro batches with snarky messages and natural dyes made from beets and spinach. Yet brand gravity remained with Sweethearts. The word itself is a registered trademark, and even generic conversation hearts read like understudies standing in for the lead. The economic math behind this is wild. Seasonal candy is a margin game, with logistics as the boss. Data from the National Retail Federation has shown for years that Valentine's shoppers spend over $2 billion on candy alone in the United States. The season is a sprint. Sell-through needs to crest around the first week of February and fall off a cliff at midnight on the 14th. Unsold bags trigger markdowns that make accountants melt faster than chocolate on a radiator. A single regional snowstorm can knock 10% off sales if it hits the weekend before Valentine's. That is how fragile and oddly thrilling this corner of the sugar business gets. The phrases inside those bags tell their own story of American speech. Company marketing teams have kept lists of around 70 to 100 active sayings at any given time, with a handful swapped in and out each year. Customer contests brought in lines like soulmate and true love for the umpteenth time, or cringe-laced tech references that aged about as well as a flip phone. The editing room has rules. No profanity, nothing cruel, nothing that makes a parent spit out coffee when a second grader dumps a bag on the table. In the 2010s, an annual update cycle turned into a miniature press tour. Reporters loved the drama of a new phrase. One season it was text me, the next, tweet me. Then hashtags appeared, and everyone got mad online about the internet colonizing candy while typing online about internet candy. The Ouroboros glowed in millennial pink. Legibility matters even more than what the phrases say. A million misprints feel charming online and infuriating in a convenience store aisle where a customer cannot read the invitation to kiss me. The first Spangler seasons made this painfully obvious. Engineers tweaked plate pressure. Ink chemistry changed. The heart surface got tiny adjustments for better print adhesion. By 2022, clean type returned. The public, forgiving as long as the bag delivered some flavor of nostalgia, moved on. On the palate, sweethearts never pretended to be upscale. The point was direct, a slightly minty, citrusy hit, a banana note that tastes like American banana candy, not fruit. The historian of taste would point out that banana flavoring in the United States leans toward isoamyl acetate, punchier than actual bananas because of cultivar loss and marketing momentum. That explains the split audience. Banana hearts read like a hug to some and like a banana-scented room spray to others. Mint polarizes the same way. Wintergreen is straight out of a 19th century apothecary cabinet, which makes sense given the product's origin story. Critics use chalk as an insult. Fans use chalk as a badge. People who hate them still eat 5, and then lecture a group chat about how awful they are. Culture lives in that hypocrisy. Nostalgia works physically too. A conversation heart is roughly the size of a thumbnail. About a gram of sugar. That means a 1-ounce box holds around 28 to 32 hearts. The little cellophane window feels like a theatre curtain. The reveal evokes a school party in 1989, even if the person holding it was born in 2003. Memory sneaks in through cheap candy and branding, older than everyone's grandparents. Collectors and archivists catalogue the sayings, the way baseball fans trade stats. Long-defunct phrases like "please send a lock of your hair" live in the historical record, and they captured a very specific Victorian appetite for keepsakes. In a world where hair wreaths were an art form, a sugar command like that carried resonance. By the mid-20th century, excess verbiage gave way to spare commands. Call me hit at the age of dial tones and rotary phones. Fax me felt slick for about 6 minutes, then died of obsolescence. The phrases that stick tend to be verbs with broad targets. Be true, be mine, kiss me. They can be romantic. They can be friendly. They can be ironic on a desk next to a stapler. Packaging followed the shifts in retail. Early on, confectioners tucked hearts into ornate paper boxes, sold by the pound at department store candy counters. As supermarkets spread and self-serve became the default, 1-ounce mini boxes slid neatly into cardboard displays. Peg bags offered 12 to 24 ounces for parties and classrooms. Special editions turned up with shimmer coatings or tart formulas. A Spanish-language bag would get its own upper code and offset display card for regions where that made sense. The back end looks like a spreadsheet of SKUs and ship-by dates. but the front of house remains tinsel and pink. One quiet reason the heart survived a century of culinary mood swings is consistency. The product behaves in extreme temperatures. Trucks can haul them through Ohio in January, or Asano in late fall, without disaster. Storage is a warehouse dream. Stack, wrap, forget. Shelf life stretches for a year or more if humidity does not crash the party. With 7 to maybe 8 billion pieces in circulation during a strong season, a 20th century idea quietly became one of the largest edible manufacturing feats in the country. People do not usually attach the word billions to anything that tastes like a pastel antacid. Scale excuses nothing until it suddenly excuses everything. The allure of personalized control kept trying to break in. Starting in the 2000s, Necco flirted with custom print programs. Businesses ordered hearts with brand names for trade shows. Couples pitched wedding favors with private jokes. The engineering bottleneck stayed tight. The printer hardware could stamp millions of B-mines because that meant a single set of plates rolling non-stop. Custom runs jammed the rhythm. Lead times ballooned. Still, the idea never died. The internet loves customization like toddlers love crayons. Smaller candy makers leapt into the gap with laser engravers and micro batches. A new cottage industry matured in Etsy listings, where nothing said, "Will you marry me?" like a $50 bag of hearts printed in a rented garage. Historians and food writers love to connect this pastel storyline to Esther Howland's Lace Valentines because the coincidence is too clean to ignore. 1847 gave Massachusetts the tools for unbreakable paper romance and sugar romance. The state should honestly put it on a license plate. The Puritan Commonwealth built an empire of candy flirting that filled the country's middle school classrooms for a century. The roads were plowed by postage and lozenges. The government actually helped. Around the same time these candies hit stride, American courts and lawmakers took a distinctly hands-off approach to holiday commercialization. Industry associations and store chains did the calendar work. Valentine's landed as a candy holiday, largely because candy makers wanted it to. The Northeast had candy factories in Boston, Cambridge, and Philadelphia. Chicago had its own clusters. Logistics kissed ambition and then married it. Through the 20th century, the hearts glided through coexisting contradictions. They were sentimental and cynical at the same time. They packaged affection with mass production discipline. They endorsed romance in minimalist syntax. They dunked on themselves by tasting like the memory of sugar more than actual sweetness. And they produced a feedback loop that other industries envied. A holiday trained a citizenry to buy a product that trained a holiday to look like that product. Every few years, a think piece pops up claiming people secretly hate conversation hearts. Sales say otherwise. Surveys from candy trade groups show that conversation hearts consistently rank in the top 5 Valentine's candies nationwide, even when the internet performs disdain. That gap between performative taste and actual checkout behavior looks like a punchline, but it is just culture behaving normally. Humans love ritual more than they love flavor. Ritual tastes like safety. Chalk with a message tastes like Valentine's Day, even for people who date in ways that would terrify a Victorian aunt. The messages also morphed into small acts of time travel. Older batches carried discontinued sayings that mapped to past anxieties and hype cycles. A 1998 fax me heart is a fossil. An early 2000s email me is a flip phone ringtone. Tweet me from 2010 is a love letter to a platform that now answers to a different name. The evergreen stock keeps the brand stable. The fads keep it legible in the present. Every marketing department claims to balance these forces. Conversation hearts actually do it on a conveyor belt. The visual branding did a lot of heavy lifting as well. That heart shape with the blocky uppercase letters has become a clip art shorthand for Valentines across ads, memes, and PTR newsletters. One emoji heart would have done it anyway. Instead, a mid-century printing mentality locked a very specific typeface into hearts across half the planet. The type is not elegant. It is thick and readable, designed for a rough candy surface. That gives it authority. This is the DMV sign of affection. Obey. Even the faults became features. Slightly off-center prints and occasional double stamps humanized the process. The texture's dryness kept the sugar from clumping into an off-putting paste in the mouth. Pastel colors looked soft on a kitchen counter. The size stopped kids from overdoing it too fast. Call that a moral panic workaround. The candy actually behaved like a conservative aunt recommending moderation. When Spangler took over and finally stabilized output, the company had a choice: chase historical gravitas or embrace novelty cycles. It tried both. Press releases highlighted the 1860s printing legacy. Seasonal promos touted new phrases tied to current slang and a return to classics. Flavors settled into a compromise, set more reminiscent of Old Necco than of artisan fruit juice. Whole Foods did not demand shelf space. Walgreens and Kroger did. The Sweethearts brand also survived because it let rivals thrive without losing the plot. Brax leaned more fruity in some assortments. Ferrara threw its weight behind Sweethearts' hearts for the sour-leaning crowd. Boutique makers went full snark with Not Into You and bylines that would scandalize the 1890s. The existence of all these side quests made the original feel even more canonical, an anchor of corn syrup steadiness in a world of novelty. As a classroom prop, the Hearts even taught kids how to edit. The limited character count forced compression. The great American novelist's origin story probably includes a second-grade desk covered in hearts, arranged into blackout poetry. Be Mine Next to Call Me and Not Now reads like a memoir title. Teachers use the bags to sort, count, and graph. Edible math beats worksheets. A reading comprehension exercise disguised as a sugar rush pays dividends for decades. The Hearts also became little billboards for consumer advocacy, without ever holding a press conference. When Necco changed flavors in 2009, the feedback cycle demonstrated how connected companies and customers had become. Letters, emails, and Facebook comments pushed the brand to recalibrate within a year. That kind of feedback might have taken 5 or 10 years to travel the product pipeline in 1950. By the 2010s, flavor democracy could create a course correction before the next Valentine's Day. Production numbers stayed eyebrow-raising. Company reps through the 2000s and 2010s gave reporters a benchmark of roughly 100,000 pounds of hearts produced per day during peak runs, translating to the multi-billion-piece scale for the season. The precise figure varies by line speed and batch size, but the macro picture sings the same tune. America's flirtiest candy runs, like airline logistics. Cultural historians sometimes press on the contradiction baked into these pastels. This is candy with an origin story in medicinal tablets. This is romance that traveled on a printing technique. This is affection that went mainstream, because an industrial backbone could deliver the goods with terrifying reliability. That precisely sums up American modernity. The country industrialized sentiment without feeling like it had. Commercial intimacy wins because it fits on a shelf between toothpaste and nail polish. A few more myths meet the shredder on their way out. The earliest hearts did not only say things like "kiss me." They hosted entire lectures, and the public often preferred the bite-sized slogans. People claim the hearts were only sweet. The ingredient lists featured a mix of fruit notes and minty ones from the beginning, a nod to lozenge heritage. The Blame the Chalk Brigade insists The texture was a corporate accident. It was the point. The hearts were designed to hold shape in mass packaging and to release flavor slowly enough not to overwhelm. Chalkiness is a feature when a class full of 8-year-olds might eat them in clusters. Even the geography of the heart's life tells a story. Boston's North End and Cambridge formed the first act. Revere took the baton. Bryan, Ohio carried it forward. For a while, an enormous Necco sign crowned a factory that looked like a college campus. The sign fell when the site changed hands in the 2010, and nostalgia made people mourn sticky floors and hairnets. A candy plant does not usually make people weepy. This one did. In the background, other holidays taught the same lesson. Candy corn rode Halloween. Peeps owned Easter. Candy canes annexed December. Each one caught a wave, industrialized it, and became a visual stand-in for the event. Only the hearts bothered to tell people what to do in tiny red letters. That anachronistic directness feels rebellious now. Pithy messages fight summaries. The hearts never got the memo. An unexpected benefit of this lo-fi design is resilience to platform changes. Social media can rebrand or vanish, and the hearts still read like themselves. Their typography works in a handheld frame. Their colors pop on camera. Their messages format into memes naturally. The best old media artifacts quietly hack new media. The heart, by sheer accident of printing constraints and color science, fits modern feeds better than half the things designed for them. By the early 2020s, the yearly panic about whether they would show up receded. The blank heart drama turned into a quirky footnote. The brand reissued Necco wafers too, which gave traditionalists a comfort anchor to pair with the hearts. Pandemic years pushed at-home rituals to the fore, which meant bag candy rose in rank. A bag of hearts on a home office desk suddenly made more emotional sense than it did in 2016, and little red letters did the same job they did in a school cafeteria in 1987. Affirmation works over Zoom. One last legacy sticks to the palate. The hearts preserve American slang in amber. Sweethearts from 1930, 1975, 1998, and 2023 read like different dialects of the same language. A lexicographer can track the rise of text me and the quiet dominance of be mine without consulting a corpus linguistics database. The corpus sat in a million checkout lanes and got devoured on sight. Food and language entangled themselves more completely here than in almost any other mass product. Every piece of this history comes backed by archival breadcrumbs. Necco's own histories recorded Oliver and Daniel Chase and the 1860s printing leap. Bostonian magazine and The Atlantic told the Victorian motto story with receipts. The New York Times documented the 2019 shortage with a little melancholy. Trade journals and company statements laid out the billions per season numbers and the 11-month production grind. National Retail Federation surveys mapped the billions spent on candy every February. The engineering specifics show up in factory tours and food science profiles. The cultural detritus shows up in old newspaper clippings that treat motto candies as novelties and in social media feeds that treat misprints as standalone poems. Taken together, they map a century and a half of America, teaching itself how to flirt at scale. A pharmacist's machine turned sugar into medicine. A brother's printing trick turned medicine into gossip. Industrial muscle turned gossip into ritual, and the ritual turned into a national habit so strong that a bankruptcy barely dented it. The American candy heart survives criticism because it is not really about taste. It is about choreography. Put a pile on the table. Fidget with them while pretending not to. Read a few aloud. Slip one. to someone with significance. Pretend it means nothing. Secretly, hope it means everything. The story ends the same way every year. By mid-February, broken hearts scatter in every break room and kitchen bowl. Half-finished slogans lie in drifts of sugar dust. The stragglers taste a little like wintergreen and a little like memory. Another season packs itself into cardboard and pallets. Machines begin again in spring for the next 6-week sprint. Industrial romance hums under fluorescent lights, and in the next February glow, the same tiny red letters will offer the same bold instructions. Be mine. Kiss me. True love. No poetry degree required. No algorithm needed. Just a pharmacist's machine. A century of stubborn tradition and billions of chalky, bossy hearts. Let's dive into our next piece. Day in the life of a what fishing was like. The Viking Age smelled more like cod guts and pine tar than blood and battlefields. By the year 1000, Northern Europe had started quietly reorganizing its diet around fish. And your day is practically a documentary of that shift. Less berserker frenzy, more blistered hands and splinters of lime-bast twine. You step into this morning knowing the glam myth got the costume wrong. The helmet never had horns. The real crown was a net float, scuffed smooth from years of use. And the real soundtrack is the slap of oars, the scold of gulls, and the dry rasp of a net gauge sliding through knots you measure with your fingers. Morning starts before the light breaks, because fish ignore human schedules. You pull on a wool tunic that smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and last week's rain, and step past a coil of line tacked with iron hooks. Most are hand-forged, black with use, the points kept scalpel bright on a stone. Archaeologists dug up dozens like them at Hedeby. Hather Boo, if you prefer the old name, along with grooved stone sinkers and wood floats. The hooks range from small 2-3 centimeters pieces for herring and scythe to beefier 5-6 centimeters brutes meant for cod or ling. Hedeby wasn't a fishing village. It was a trading powerhouse in the 9th and 10th centuries, and still it was littered with fishing gear. That says something about the daily grind no saga bothered to sing about. You grease a few knots with pine tar and check your line. The cord is twisted plant fiber, not hemp luxury, but local work. Lime bast from linden in a bark is a Scandinavian classic. And nettle fibers show up in Old Norse textiles and could serve in ropes and netting. Hemp and flax existed too, but you use what is at hand. The netting twine in your hands is slick because someone, maybe you, treated it with tannin-rich bark or tar to make it last a little longer. People in the north learned fast that salt was not their economic friend. It was expensive, often imported, and low-salt life pushes you to dry, smoke, and protect your gear instead. That is why there's a black sheen on the oar blades and the net floats, and why your fingers smell like a shipyard. Myth-busting enters with your first breath of cold air. You do not march to a longship with a carved dragon keel to catch dinner. Longships show off in paintings because they look good. Fishing today is a low, solid rowboat, a fairing or something like it, maybe 5 to 6 meters long, clinker built with overlapping planks, oak or pine, and light enough to shove into the water by hand with 2 or 3 people. Excavated small boats near the Gokstad burial show the type, practical, repairable, and more likely to see 10,000 herring than one Anglo-Saxon monastery. If you later want to haul a year's worth of dried cod to a market like Kaupang or Burka, that's when a narrow, beamy cargo ship earns its keep. For now, a narrow keel, some oars, a bailer, and an anchor stone are your reality. While the hem of your cloak drinks dew, you run through a checklist, older than your grandparents. Bait bucket. Net gauge. A flat piece of bone or wood that standardizes mesh so your net doesn't fish the wrong size. Netting needle loaded with twine for quick repairs. Spare or bailer. Always a bailer, because bailing is inevitable. You move to the edge where someone last dragged the boat up on a roller log. Slide her into the shallows, and the hulls, tarred planks suck in the water. Sounds like a thirsty throat. The air tastes of salt and alder smoke, and somewhere a gull rehearses its lifelong argument with the concept of your lunch. You mark your place the way Norse sailors described it to each other. A line that split-topped fir with the notch on the distant cliff. Keep the tiny skerry just kissing the shoulder of the point. When they line up, you're above a ridge of rock where cod and scythe cruise. Coastal fishing relies on this mental GPS before compasses become standard gear in these latitudes. Njal Saga does not narrate them, but the place names keep the instructions alive. Cod bank this, salmon stream that. You row with a steady rhythm, hands blistered into calluses that earn their rent each week, and the boat nose weaves through kelp beds that hold more life than any heroic ship's deck. In these strands live wrasse for bait, the sand eels that cod go feral for, and a world of crustaceans nobody writes epic poetry about. The first job is to drop gill nets where herring stream past in their seasonal moods. You fold them out carefully, because nothing ruins a morning like a snarl of cords while fish decide your destiny elsewhere. A gill net works by becoming invisible enough that fish swim into it and catch their gills in the mesh. The float's wood or bark, sometimes cork if you're lucky, or plugged into a trade route that pulls wood magic from the south. Float line on top, sink line on bottom, with stones or lead weights. Lead sinkers show up in Hedeby archaeology. Stone sinkers carved with grooves show up nearly everywhere. Mesh widths vary. A few centimeters for herring, bigger for scythe, and you mark it by the net gauge you used when spinning this thing by the fire, while someone retold a saga for the 100th time. Silence in everything, except the oarlocks. You pay out 30, maybe 40 fathoms of net, a fathom being what your outstretched arms can measure. A fathom in Old Norse, around 1.7 to 1.9 meters. Depending on the man, nets can be longer. Some shore signs stretch over 100 meters when a crew works them from the beach. You don't have a stadium of helpers today. You have a small crew at most, a batlag in later Norwegian parlance, and you fish what you can manage. Then comes the long line. There's myth here that needs killing. Spears and dramatic harpoons look great in movies, but daily Norse fishing loved lines with hooks, and lots of them. You coil a main line in the boat's bottom, evenly spaced snoods, short leaders, each with a hook. The spacing is learned, muscle memory. A fathom or two between them, enough to reduce tangles. Archaeology from Scandinavia and Iceland into the medieval period shows longline sporting dozens to hundreds of hooks. Iron was not cheap, but it was reused relentlessly. Hooks might be iron. Older or inland contexts also yield bone and antler hooks, and Greenlandic finds keep that tradition alive into the Norse Atlantic. The hooks are baited with mussels, pried off rocks, bits of herring you saved from an earlier run, or sand eels you netted in the shallows. Cod have a wide culinary imagination and poor impulse control. You profit from that. The line eases down, and the boat drifts just a breath in the current. Sand across the bottom does its slow river. Kelp waves like hair, and you set a small anchor stone to keep drifts from rewriting your map. The world is now the size of a boat and a handful of breath. Whoever wrote heroic verse traded this moment for meter and metaphor. But the truth of your day lives right here, listening to the water and the tick of line across palm. Time works differently at sea. You do not check a sundial. You watch the kelp stalks paying in and out under the surface, and the lazy circle of a lone kittiwake riding the air like a kite that forgot it had a string. Then you haul. One hook picks up a weight and moves like a shrugging log until it morphs into the panicked thrum of a fish understanding new physics. Ling? Maybe. Cod, more likely. Another hook jerks, and the line tightens into a pattern across your palm that speaks fluent biology. 2 fish in play. Cod are easy to imagine because they are easy to meet. Big ones in the north can push well past 10 kilograms, and any angler with local pride can rattle off numbers that double that. You work steady and economical, leaning, guiding fish close to the surface, sliding them into the boat with a swing that spares your shins from the gaff's iron hook. A myth barges in and asks for attention. Sea monsters populate marginalia in medieval manuscripts and grin from the carved stems of ships, but people who fish for a living do not misunderstand their home. The sagas mention whales like neighbours, not fantasy. Oh, there of Halogaland, that late 9th century Norwegian who told his story at King Alfred's court in England, described the northern seas as places of whales, seals, and rich fisheries. He knew reindeer and walrus better than cod quotas, but he lived among fishermen who read currents like runes. The monsters are mostly wind and wave. The hazard is real, and the respect is daily. Your superstition, a quiet refusal to speak certain animal names at sea, a little charm tucked into a pocket, coexists with cold evaluations of clouds and tide lines. Hauling a long line means rhythm. Pull, unhook, rebait if needed, coil. Hooks glitter in a wet parade as the boat takes on new weight in slippery, flicking life. You gut the first cod while the second thrashes, because efficiency is non-negotiable. Nick the belly, reach in, pull. The smell is immediate and unapologetic. The liver, fat and gold, goes into a separate container. Norwegians later in the Middle Ages boil cod livers into oil, and the habit likely has earlier roots. Oil is lamplight and trade in a bowl. Roe and milk become food, sometimes dried, sometimes cooked fresh. Heads are not waste in this economy. Dried heads are food too. Every piece stands accused of usefulness. Heritage shows up in tiny details. The knot you tie to fix a broken mesh is a netting knot, cousin to a sheet bend, quick and reflexive. At Haithabu and sites around the Baltic, archaeologists find net fragments with specific mesh sizes and the ghosts of wooden floats. At York, Jorvik, the latrines of Coppergate gave up piles of fish bones, herring vertebrae, cod jaws, the evidence of meals eaten far from northern spawning grounds. In Orkney, at places like the Brew of Bursay, middens are thick with cod, scythe, and ling bones, a record written by dinner scraps. And stable isotope studies on fish bones from London and elsewhere point back to the north by their chemical signatures. By the 11th and 12th centuries at least, Londoners were chewing Arctic Norwegian cod without setting foot in Norway. Scholars, like James H. Barrett and colleagues, hammered this home in the early 2000s, tracing a fish event horizon around AD 950-1050. An uptick in marine fish consumption across northern Europe that starts during your lifetime, and your boat helped write that graph. Mid-morning grows into something warmer. You eat like a fisherman because you are one. Not porridge fantasies or dripping roast boar, but a strip of dried fish. Stockfish, if you're Norwegian, scried in Old Norse, banged against the gunwale to loosen the fibres. Then, chewed with a smear of butter, if the gods smiled on the churn. Dry cod in this climate is like edible wood. Properly dried, it lasts for years and loses up to 2/3 of its wet weight. A 5 kilograms cod might become 1.5 or less of rock-hard protein. That's why it sails so well. Salt would soften and quicken the job, but cheap salt is a luxury here until later centuries. Drying and smoking rule. Bergen's Hanseatic stockfish empire will rise in the High Middle Ages, but the tech behind it lives here now. Split the cod, keep a strip of backbone as a hinge, spread it like a book, and hang it on racks. The hjell in wind and cold air until it becomes a commodity. The herring net waits. You take hold of the float line and begin the lift. Hand over hand, the surface whispers first. Then beads of water start to pop, and the first silver bodies wheelsaw the surface. Herring are circus school graduates with no sense of calm. Their bodies light up the air with scales that come off like tinsel. You do not linger for photos. You move. Fish out, into the boat. Net down, repeat. In Denmark, and along the Bohuslän coast of Sweden, seasonal herring runs feed entire economies in later centuries, but even in the Viking Age, when law codes start to get written down in the 12th and 13th centuries, hints about salmon and eel rights and weirs show fishing's pull. The Gulathing law in western Norway, preserved in a 13th century manuscript, but resting on older practice, talks about who can build salmon weirs in rivers and where they must leave openings and navigation lanes clear. It fines people for destroying your gear, because gear is wealth. The net lifts more than fish. It lifts today's math. Mesh too small, and you get fines and angry neighbors, and a net choked with fingerling ghosts. Mesh too large, and the big fish laugh on their way past. The net gauge you carry enforces self-policing in a world where law is local and memory is the ledger. A word floats up that modern ears don't expect in a Viking mouth. Sustainability, Viking style. Nobody calls it that, but river salmon rights and eel traps are serious property. Salmon weirs, fences that funnel fish into traps, are common, and across northern Europe from England to Scandinavia, early law codes try to balance private harvest with public waterways. The Domesday Book in 1086 lists weirs and their values. In England, Norse worlds have their own versions. Kill a man's net with a knife and owe him silver. A mark is around 200 grams of it, and nobody wants that bill. Destroying a salmon weir in certain contexts can cost your next year's income. These are not random crimes. They are attacks on a household's pantry. Back on the boat, the sun climbs. You look inland for cues too. Salmon move in summer and autumn, pushing upriver to spawn. Eels slither down in autumn to sea, if you're set with the traps. Cod crowd the Lofoten waters in late winter to spawn. Lofoten becomes a medieval superhighway for fishers by the 12th century. But even around the year 1000, men row in long seasonal caravans to vertical walled islands for stockfish. History holds that memory in place names and marriage patterns. People meet at the fisheries, trade favors, and fish, and sometimes spouses. Back to work. Nets coil back into a thin black mountain. Fingers pick scales out that will rot and invite stink. A net buried under slime means a net that tears next week. You haul until your shoulders suggest a different career, and then you haul some more. Boats have a way of selecting who they want on them. By now your back has signed a contract with the sea. Post-landing is as much the day as the sea. The boat kisses stones. 3 hands pull it above the gentle fetch, and the village choreography begins. Here, another myth shuffles in for air. The raider's world pretends women stayed home and stared at the horizon. Real life in the north told a different story. Women process fish own property and law codes, run farms while men ride out to the Lofoten fisheries, or, occasionally, to raid or trade. Dried fish is merciless work. Split, clean, rinse in salt water, hang. The net-mending boss in most Scandinavian villages can easily be a woman with a netting needle and a temper tested by twine and wind. The sagas are obsessed with feuds and poets, but they drop lines that prove the economy under them. Salmon writes in Laxdala Saga, a fight over a reef in Eyjabygja. Men marooned on Drengi with fishing, a survival in Grettis Saga. You can trace the outline of work behind the words. Onshore, the rack goes up, poles lashed into A-frames, crosspieces. The hjell bristles like a giant bone comb meant to catch wind. If this is a wetter coast, sometimes cod dry on rocks and lines during early stages, then move to racks. The precise technique flexes with microclimates, but the principle does not. Air, cold, time. There's no salt budget to sprinkle around, like a Mediterranean magnate. Even herring, which medieval people elsewhere drowned in lakes of brine, might here be smoked quickly in low, cool smokehouses cobbled from whatever stands at a cheap right angle. Smoking adds flavor and buys time when the sky refuses to cooperate. The guts pile as you work, and someone starts a vat to render livers. It is a smell that announces itself as far as wind permits. Boiling livers into oil creates a product that pours like metal at a few degrees above freezing and burns in lamps with a sharp, marine tang. You use what you have. If a trader with salt shows up in early summer, the math changes. Salted herring becomes mobile in a different way, and the story jumps centuries to the big herring markets. But in your day right now, drying leads. It is the simplest technology that turns fish into time. Authority edges in with a cloak of details. There are fines and dates and place names that stake your day into the ground. Birka in Sweden, mid-8th to 10th centuries, produced fish bones in quantities that embarrass any saga's focus on mead. Hedeby's waterfront was a scrapyard of hooks and sinkers. York's latrines are a fishbone mountain. The island of Bjorka in Malaren sees fish in nets as readily as furs in boats. The Norse colony in Dublin sits on an estuary full of salmon and eels. The archaeology there preserves herring bones recorded in dark layers. The University of York's Environment and Archaeology teams wrote whole books worth of reports on fish, remains in Anglo-Scandinavian deposits at Coppergate. Meanwhile, at Torful in Iceland, a hill name says Turf Cave, but the farms around list salmon rights as property in Landnambok, the Book of Settlements. Not all of this is from your beach. Some is farther off, but the chorus sings the same refrain. Fish made life livable, tradable, sustainable. Mid-afternoon is for repair. The boat is half overturned to drain. Someone hauls a line tight between two posts for net repairs. The netting needle travels like a shuttle in a loom. Your fingers count mesh holes with the fluency of someone who learned it as a kid. Children learn these things as games, then as survival skills. Your hands oil themselves with fish and twine. The knot you tie, over around, through, pull, has tightened 1,000,000 times across 1,000 coasts. This is not romantic. It is maintenance, and maintenance is civilization. Fishing weirs on a local river are checked by a pair of younger hands. If this day exists in late spring or summer, salmon run and the weir hums. The law cares, the gulveiðing, and later frostathing laws in Norway and gregars in Iceland all weigh in on river rights and fish fences. Weirs cannot block navigation entirely. and disputes draw silver. The idea of private property tied to the water shocks nobody in your village. It's older than your great-grandparents' bones. The Sami to the north and inland have fish economies that outdate your settlements by centuries. Norse farmers and sailors interact, trade, argue, and intermarry with Sami communities. Oh, they're talked about paying tax in furs, bird skins and ropes from walrus hide to a chieftain. The detail that often gets missed is who knows what where. Sami netting and trapping knowledge flows back into the coast, especially regarding rivers and lakes. The Vikings were borrowers with pride. Rope-making tricks, tar recipes and net designs migrate without passports. Late afternoon edges toward organization, shares and trade and counting. The boat crew divides catch by a system that would sound familiar to any cooperative. Work done equals shares in the payoff. Oarsman gets a share, net owner more. Bait gathered counts for something. So does wear and tear on gear. The details vary by coast and century, but the logic holds. In the north, later on, boat crews on the Lofoten fisheries divide fish by the part system. Your era contains its ancestors. No saga reads you the rulebook, because the rulebook lives in mouths and memory, and when a case goes sour, in the thing assembly, where law speakers recite, judge, and fine. Grindset enters with the markets. You bundle dried fish in sheaves, tie them with bark cord, and stow them in a cool, airy loft. Fish heads dry separately. Roe can be eaten or dried. Roes are protein bars, with better marketing centuries later. Oil goes into skin bags. When the time comes, these ride a boat to a market town. Kaupang in Vestfold hums in the 9th and 10th centuries. Ålgård on the west coast grows from a fishing base. Trondheim, and later Bergen, collect and reship like ambitious middlemen. Across the water, the Danelaw towns of England, York, Lincoln, Norwich, start snacking on imported fish around the millennium. By the 11th century, London's elite stomachs leave chemical signatures saying bluntly, someone brought them cod from cold northern seas. Science caught that unstable isotope work that reads like CSI for dinner. Another myth gets tossed on the cutting board. Meat moved people's imagination, but fish fed calendars. After Christianization, crawling into Norway and Iceland around the late 10th and early 11th centuries, fasting days multiply across the year. Meat-free days inflate the demand for fish. You don't have to love the bishop to love the money. A good stockfish rack becomes like a printing press for silver. But the habits that make it work existed already. Turning slippery, perishable fish into stiff, stackable food was the prequel. Lesson from the beach. The toolkit is modest, the engineering eternal. There's the baler, because wood leaks and weather forgets you. There's an anchor stone, a hole through it, or a groove with a rope seizing slick. There's a gaff, iron hook on a handle, because a panicked cod will twist free at the gunwale, just to test your vocabulary. There's a wooden club to quiet fish in the boat before they make a break for your shins. There are knives, one big, one small, both kept honest on a whetstone. There's a bucket, wood-staved and hooped with iron, that weighs more when you don't want the exercise. Every item shows up in graves, middens, and ruined boathouses across the Norse world. The poetry of it is the repetition. Late-day light goes liquid and soft. The smell of smoke floats up as someone fires the smokehouse. This is not a Texas barbecue situation with slow-simmered sauce. This is raw pragmatism. A small hut or lean-to with racks and a low fire of alder or birch makes a gentle veil over fish that need a little insurance policy against damp weather. You work like a production line. One pair of hands feeds the racks, Another watches the fire. A third rotates fish out to breathe. No salty luxury, no spice caravans, but a competence that turns weather into shelf life. You feel the day in your wrists. Salt has worked its way into cracks on your knuckles. The nicks on your hands do that sting that only fish slime lifts into legend. People will talk about Viking toughness, as if it only belongs to raids. But your forearms say the slogan lives here, hauling 6 times a day until tendons sign their complaint in swelling. Both thighs and net fingers beat gym abs. A raider month is fireworks. A fishing year is the mortgage paid. Surprise arrival. A trader steps over rock and sand to count your fish with a practiced eye. People like this operate at every pinch point where things turn into silver. He wears a knife and a scale. Arabic silver dirhams flooded into Scandinavia in the 9th and early 10th centuries through Eastern trade. By your century, English pennies and German coins join the party. Weights and balances check each other. A hacked-up bar of silver. The hack silver stores of hoards across Norway and Denmark can become a stack of dried fish for winter or a bit of boat repair. Walrus ivory and furs get the law. Dried cod gets the receipts. The overland gossip trades as fast as gear. Someone mentions a run of larger herring to the south. Someone else claims salmon jumping clean over the weir like goats on a dare. Place names begin to feel like a stock ticker. Hafrsfjord codbank steady. Lofoten early run promises. Trendelag eels in motion by the moon. A later chronicle will call herring fairs and guilds and taxes. You live in their scaffolding before the paint dries. This is a nitrogen economy painted in fish scale sheen. Protein comes off the sea because northern soils love to sulk under rain and rock. Grain exists. Barley fields grin as they can. But calories from the ocean fill in when weather acts like a parent who forgot to pick you up from school. Farmers and fishers often are the same household, wearing different hats at different times of year. Winters lock the inland fields in ice. The coast remains alive. Around you stand structures that make this whole thing reliable. A naust, both house, holds the boat on off days. Roof pitched steep, doors forever arguing with the wind. Rope hangs on pegs, organized by use and memory. Tines of wood prop a stretched net so it dries and doesn't rot. A scraping board to descale. A tub to brine if salt shows up. Baskets woven from birch or willow to carry the day's decisions. A kid passes with a carved wooden net float, as if it were a ball, which it is, in a sense. No childhood is immune to equipment becoming toys. Gear doubles as play, because play becomes training. Evening arrives with that clean marine twilight people later spend money to visit in tourist brochures. Your hands move slower and surer now, trained by the day. You lay the last fish on the rack, step back, and count. Not because an overseer hunts quota, but because your winter depends on numbers, adding like you need. A split cod, bent open over a frame, rows down like books in a library. No one can read, but everyone knows how to use. The law breathes in the last hour. The local thing meets on a flat by the shore, or by a rock that cannot move. Because law likes anchors. The loudspeaker recites. Property lines. Salmon writes. Fines for cutting another man's drift net. Rules about landing in someone else's cove. You hear echoes that will be written down later. Oral law precedes parchment. Gregars, the Icelandic law code, and the Gulathing text share the same bones. Fisheries defined, violence fined, gear respected. Even shipwreck codes get airtime. Salvage is a delicate dance with ownership. The logic of the sea bleeds inland and gets measured in ounces of silver. Another correction folds into your bones. Those horned helmets in later paintings wore their lies boldly at 19th century costume parties. In your century, helmets are conical, plain, occasionally ridged, and too precious to waste on fish. Your daily headgear is a wool cap greasy with salt. Your armor is a layered sweater with a fish knife at your belt. Your shield hangs above the bier from that one time you played guard in a ship crew. There are seasons for everything, but the work that keeps the stew pot talking to you at night happens right here, not there. Around the larger Norse world, other coasts mirror your day with local flair. On Shetland and Orkney, wind-swept cliffs overlook boats carrying lines for scythe and cod. Bones in middens say so. In Iceland, settlers in the late 9th and 10th centuries carve out farms, but keep a line in the sea, with Landnámabók remembering rivers by their fish more than anything else. In the Baltic, lagoons and islands breed a net culture with clay or lead sinkers and clever weirs. Across the Irish Sea, Dublin eats estuary fish, and ships, ivory, and slaves, while your cousins fish. Across the North Sea, East Anglia's shores smell of smokehouses, while Danish traders weigh their silver. The global ocean of your time is local, but it threads into long routes where cod hardens into currency. You close out the day with that steady fatigue humans crave, because modern gym culture reverse-engineered it. Effort plus outcome equals satisfaction. A few fish hang wrong. You fix them. The knot slips. You check it again. You inventory the bait bucket. Tomorrow's bait lives in today's offal. Muscles crack open with a twist that decades of fingers perfected. A line gets paid out to dry across a beam. Someone stows. Oars head down so rain runs the right way. Craft knowledge stacks up like the split cod. Visible, physical, unromantic, and utterly extraordinary. Invisible science waits in the background like a quiet clerk who remembers everything. The isotopes in cod bones from English markets whisper, Arctic, centuries later, to researchers like Barrett and colleagues. The net weight grooves tell future archaeologists what you used. Stone, when metal hid in someone's hoard. Lead, when trade smiled. The charred remains in a blackened pit revealed tar kilns that powered boats and gear. Scandinavian tar production ramped up in the late Iron Age and Viking Age, and wood tar's fingerprint shows up in boats that held the Atlantic at bay. The sagas, when they bother, leave a line here and there talking about fishing like a fact always in the room, not a star. Egil's father farms and fishes. Grettir lives off fish on rocks like Drengi when exile squeezes him. Laxdala counts salmon like wealth. Each mention is a breadcrumb trail that leads right back to today's wreck. You hear some loud certainty from shoreline philosophers that raiding built the wealth. Raids grabbed headlines and treasure. Fisheries built systems and calendars. Wealth that outlives a single voyage needs reliability. The fish event horizon across Europe punctuates your work. Monasteries and markets shift towards marine meat. Households besides yours smell like stockfish. The church calendar pours gasoline on the trend a century from now, with fasting rules that, intentionally or not, privilege coastal economies and widen trade. But you live in the pilot episode. The last light lowers, and the floor of the loft where your sleep spaces out. Bundles of drying cod like giant shin bones for a mythic creature that lives on protein and wind. Every dried body is weight you can pivot into cloth, iron, rent, or ale. Pine tar sticks to your thumb, a varnish telling you what you touched today. You kick off leather shoes, wedge them where they'll dry without curling, and breathe the double-layered smell of smoke and sea. The gulls get quiet. The rack creaks a little in the breeze. Someone further down the shore in another village smiles at almost exactly the same thing. The Viking Age gets miscast as a montage of axes and firelight, sprinting into monasteries. The truth holds simpler and, somehow, grander. A web of people, heavily outnumbered by fish, who learned to read the water and made an industry from it. It looked like this. It sounded like this. It smelled exactly like this. You lie back listening to the quiet, rough conversation of timbers settling into night. Your hands throb in that tolerable way. That means tomorrow will be the same. Or not, depending on the weather. There's no cliffhanger with a dragon boat tonight, but there's a cliff full of fish bones in a midden that future scholars will date and count and link to 1,000 other heaps in 1,000 other places. When they write their papers and footnote their data, they will describe an economy that ran on exactly the kind of day you just lived. Pine tar and salt spray, stockfish and law codes, mesh gauges and liver oil. All of it specific. All of it ordinary. All of it in the ledger book of history. Astonishing. Let's dive into our next piece. The cultural influence of the Etruscans on Rome. Rome strutted onto the world stage like it invented every move, but it learned a lot of its best choreography from the neighbors who already owned the dance floor, the Etruscans. Picture central Italy, around 600 BC, polished bronze gleaming in the sun, terracotta statues with painted smiles, chariots rattling across racecourses, and priests calmly inspecting the liver of a sheep because the gods, allegedly, wrote down the weather report on internal organs. That was Etruria. Modern Tuscany plus slices of Lazio and Umbria. An entire culture that Rome took notes from wholesale. The punchline is that later Romans pretended this was all very Roman. Sure. And sunglasses are an American invention because Hollywood wears them. Start with a provocation. The most Roman-looking thing short of the Colosseum is a bundle of rods with an axe in it. The fasces. Everyone has seen it carved into stone behind a judge's bench or stamped on an old coin. That iconic symbol of Roman magisterial authority. Straight out of Etruscan politics. Livy, the guy who turned Roman origins into prestige TV, says Rome's early kings adopted the farces from Etruscan rulers. The bundle shouted, "Law and order." The axe whispered, "Capital punishment outside the city." And the lictors carrying them walked like they owned the sidewalk. The early Roman kings used 12 lictors. The number likely mirrored the Etruscan leagues, 12 city-states. It wasn't subtle, but a symbol is only a symbol. The Etruscans imprinted Rome down to the plumbing. Literally. The Cloaca Maxima, that grand sewer with the name that sounds like a gladiator, but is actually a drain, started out in the 6th century BC under the Tarquins, the Etruscan-linked dynasty that gave Rome its last kings. It hauled water out of the low, marshy basin that would become the Roman Forum. Archaeologists can still walk through stretches of its barrel-vaulted masonry. The engineering style, massive stone blocks, careful curves, no cement yet, has Etruscan Masonry Guild written all over it. Before the Romans started pouring concrete, like they were frosting a wedding cake, they were learning stone tricks from people who could make arches work. The arch deserves a brief myth-melting moment. Romans did not invent it. They industrialized it. Etruscans were deploying stone arches heavy enough to scare a modern contractor. Check Perugia's Porta Augusta, a 3/3 century B city gate with a proud keystone and flanking pilasters. Volterra's Porta all Arco still flexes its basalt grin. Rome took this technology, and after a few centuries plus volcanic ash-based concrete, boom, aqueducts and amphitheaters everywhere. But the spark, using the arch as a serious structural tool, was burning bright in Etruria. Zoom out to the skyline. Early Rome used to look Greekish in imagination, but walking through the 6th century Bath city would have hit different. Steep-roofed temples with vast terracotta figures strutting along the ridgelines, wooden columns sheathed in paint, deep porches, high podiums, and big steps. Vitruvius, the Roman architect, writing in the 1st century Bath, even gave the style a name. Tuscan. He describes how Etruscan temples put most of the visual drama at the front and saved the sanctum for a triple cellar. That's not a random feature. Rome's heavyweight temple. The temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, on the Capitoline, was exactly that kind of Etruscan showpiece. Begun under Tarquinius Priscus, completed under Tarquinius Superbus, and dedicated in 509 Bus, the year the monarchy fell. It featured Jupiter flanked by Juno and Minerva, a Capitoline triad that smacks more of Etruria's religious patterning than old Latin tradition. The statue of Jupiter inside. Ancient writers say the artist was an Etruscan sculptor, from Veii named Vulca. When a culture hires an out-of-town artist to make the city's top god, that's not cultural borrowing. That's cultural dependence. Etruscan art wasn't shy. Terracotta Acateria, the roofline statues, were giant. The Apollo of Veii, around 510-500 BC, strides with a grin that can still be felt across millennia. The sarcophagus of the spouses from Cerveteri, about 520 BC, shows a reclining couple at a banquet, both smiling, both front and center. That alone would rattle a typical Greek visiting from, say, Athens. Circa 500 BC, Greek writers side-eyed Etruscan women for sharing banquets with men and appearing in public with visible status. They left names on tombs, using both parents' names. Paintings in Tarquinius' Tomb of the Leopards show mixed-gender banquets with musicians and grapevines. That makes Rome's relatively high status for matrons later look slightly less like a Roman miracle and a bit more like an echo of Etruscan social norms. Not a copy and paste, Romans remained much more conservative about women in politics, but a cultural draft in the same direction. It also smelled like incense and sounded like double pipes. Etruscan ritual brought music and choreography into public life. In 364 BC, during a plague, Romans imported Etruscan entertainers to perform ritual dances and music to calm the gods. Livy records this as the origin story of Rome's ludi scenici, dramatic games. Even the Latin word for actor, histria, is believed to be borrowed from Etruscan. So when Romans later bragged about their theatrical tradition, yes, Roman comedy was its own beast, but the spark arrived via Etruscan ritual specialists doing the ancient equivalent of get a DJ, make the gods less angry. And then there's the spookiest export, the so-called Etrusca Disciplina. The Etruscans weren't just into divination. They built a whole instruction manual for it. Romans talked about 3 sets of Etruscan books: the Libri Haruspicini, how to read omens in animal entrails; the Libri Fulguralis, how to interpret lightning; and the Libri Rituales, how to set up sacred space and do the rituals on time with the correct vibes. A bronze model liver found near Piacenza in northern Italy, 2nd or 1st century B, maps the sky's divine real estate onto a sheep's liver. 16 sections, each linked to a deity. The Etruscan priest didn't just see a weird spot on a liver. He saw where in the cosmic zoning board the gods were throwing shade. Romans adopted haruspices as an official advisory class. The Senate kept Etruscan experts on speed dial, right into the imperial era. Cicero criticized them with the dry wit of a statesman who still had to invite them to the meeting. The irony is piquant. Rome, the rational conqueror, clutching a sacred liver when the sky burped lightning. The Etruscans shaped how the Romans thought about city limits and sacred space. Two words define this: templum and pomerium. Templum doesn't just mean temple in an everyday way. It's a ritually defined rectangle of sky, ground, or building laid out by an august staff. Draw the lines correctly, and the gods can communicate within them. The pomerium was the sacred boundary of Rome itself. Cross the pomerium with the wrong insignia, and the gods objected. Which is why lictors left the axes out of their fasces within the city, and why generals couldn't legally tote soldiers across without some very specific legal trickery. The ritual logic came from Etruscan rulebooks, even if Roman augury also had deep Italic roots. The whole Roman obsession with where to hold a vote, how to take auspices, when to call off a meeting because thunder rumbled from the wrong quadrant. The bureaucratic nervous system was coded in an Etruscan-friendly language. Rome's kings looked Etruscan too. Sella Carulus, that folding ivory chair of power. Etruscan. Toga praetexta, the white garment with a purple border worn by magistrates and freeborn boys. Etruscan style, aristocratic clothing. The toga picta, the full purple and gold triumphal outfit. Again, rooted in Etruscan regal dress. Pliny the Elder mentions that during a triumph the victor's face might be painted red with cinnabar, an imitation of Jupiter's statue, a practice often associated with archaic Etruscan ritual. The chariot in the triumphal procession, the laurel, the big spectacle in the Circus Maximus. These trappings line up with Etruscan ceremonial habits around leadership. Nobody pretends the Romans had no native ideas, but the early regalia of Roman power is a museum dedicated to Etruscan aesthetics. The city-building agenda during the monarchy backs that up with brick and mortar. The Tarquins didn't just rule Rome, they upgraded it. Tarquinius Priscus, traditionally reigning 616, 579 bats, supposedly started the Circus Maximus. The evidence of early racetracks and wooden grandstands comes through layers of later rebuilding, but the tradition rings culturally plausible because Etruscans loved chariot racing. Tarquinius Superbus, 535-509 bus, finished the big-ticket temple on the Capitoline and expanded Rome's urban footprint. In between, Servius Tullius, 578-535 Bess, organized Rome's citizenry into classes and tribes for purposes of conscription and taxation. Servian reforms that sit in the fuzzy zone between legend and plausible memory. The so-called Servian Wall, visible in blocks of tufa around the Aventine and Esquiline, is actually from the early 4th century BIS, but its memory glued itself to Servius in Roman storytelling. The moral isn't that every fact is precise. It's that Romans consistently linked their first serious urbanization to kings steeped in Etruscan culture. Even Rome's alphabet came through Etruscan hands. The Etruscans took a version of the Greek alphabet, specifically the Euboean variant used by Greek traders from places like Pithecusae and Cumae around the 8th century BC, and adapted it to their own language. They didn't need letters for B, D, or G because their language didn't use those sounds. They liked F, which they invented to write a /W/ or an aspirated bilabial. The Romans then borrowed that Etruscanized alphabet for Latin in the 7th century BA. The Latin C did double duty for both /G/ and /K/ until someone introduced G as a modified C, Romans preserved the habit of writing quae to capture the /quae/tag sound, because that's how the Etruscan script handed it over. Even the shapes of the early letters on Roman inscriptions give off Etruscan energy, a retro flavor visible on stone throughout central Italy. No Etruscans, no Latin alphabet, as it's known, and no Romans carving laws in public in nice, neat capitals. Numbers tell the same story in shorthand. Roman numerals didn't fall from the sky. The system developed out of tally marks and Etruscan-style numerical notation. Etruscans used I and X and had signs for larger values. The Latin I, V, X, L, C, D, M, stabilized later. But that urge to carve numbers in simple strokes and symbols grew up in the same peninsula. Neighborhood. The subtractive quirks, like I for 4, came even later in Roman history, but the bone structure of the counting system leans Etruscan. The proof sits less in a single gotcha object and more in layers of inscriptions. Tom data, dedications, graffiti, showing the gradual evolution of how to write 7. And the circus. Oh, the circus. Etruscans adored horse racing. Painted tombs at Tarquinia show whip-snapping charioteers. The layout of Roman race culture, the spina down the center of the track, the turning posts, the team rivalries, feels like the kind of sport that migrates intact with its managers and fan base. Rome's circus tradition swelled into the Circus Maximus, with 250,000 seating in the imperial era. The seed money and concept still wear an Etruscan jacket. Speaking of spectacle, here comes a claim that loves to start fights at history conferences: gladiators. The earliest definite gladiatorial show in Rome took place in 264 bars during the funeral of Junius Brutus Pera, when his sons presented 3 pairs of fighters in the Forum Boarium. That's a small and frightening start. Where did the idea come from? Evidence from southern Italy, Campania, and Etruria shows blood sports linked to funerary rituals long before 264 backs. In the tomb of the augurs at Tarquinia, 530 BC, a masked figure labeled Fursu, torments, a bound man with a dog. It looks like a ritualized fight. Campanian tomb art shows paired fighters with shields and helmets. Many scholars read the Roman games as an italic mashup of southern and Etruscan funerary customs. Credit shared. What seems most solid is that Romans did not invent the concept from scratch. It oozed into Rome from the Italian peninsula's older cultures, with Etruscans tossing in at least the masks and the taste for elaborate rites of death. Architecture circles back in the form of city planning. Marzabotto, an Etruscan town near Bologna from the 5th century BC, shows off a tidy orthogonal grid. Broad north-south and east-west streets meet at right angles. Ritual orientation mattered so much that Etruscan priests would take the auspices before setting a city's grid, mapping the plan to the cardinal directions and divine sectors. Romans picked up the taste for order. Later Roman colonies planted across Italy and beyond used modular, orthogonal plans. The famous pair of main roads, the Cardo and the Decumanus, trace back to these practices. Is every Roman grid Etruscan? Not exactly. Greek colonies also loved geometry. But combine grid love with Etruscan ritual mapping of sacred boundaries, and the Roman result smells unmistakably of Etruria's cosmology turned urbanism. Money and metal financed the Etruscan masterpiece. They mined iron around Populonia and Elba and mastered bronze casting to a level that still humbles. The chimera of Arezzo, a 4th century BC bronze of a lion-goat snake hybrid mid-raw and mid-bite, survived a Roman pit, and then the Renaissance's obsession with digging up nice things. The Mars of Todi, a 5th-century B's bronze warrior in polished armor, lifting a libation, carries a quiet gravity. The Aringatore, Ol Metale, circa late 2nd or 1st century Bess, shows an Etruscan elite wearing a Roman toga and raising his hand in the quiet listen up of a politician. That statue is basically the last Instagram post before the account changed names. The man's Etruscan name is carved in Latin script. The cultural handoff is complete, but not erased. Taking stock of language is roll call time for loanwords. Latin picked up quite a few from Etruscan. Satel's bodyguard is probably Etruscan. Persona may owe something to the Etruscan fursu, that masked figure from the tomb paintings, though some etymologists point to Latin personare. To sound through, a shout-out to theatre masks. Histrio, actor, likely Etruscan. Atrium, the smoky central hall of a house, gets debated, with some linking it to Latin atter, black, from the soot of an open hearth, and others noting parallels in Etruscan domestic spaces. The safe summary: when Romans talk about costumes, masks, bodyguards, and parts of a house, Etruscan vocabulary sneaks in. Domestic life absorbed Etruscan moods as well. Early Roman houses of the well-to-do used the atrium with a central opening, compluvium, and basin, impluvium, to catch rainwater. That kind of layout has deep roots in central Italy, where Etruscan elites built compound-like homes with a focus on that central hall as a social stage. The famous so-called hut of Romulus, on the Palatine, reconstructed in later Roman religion as an archaic thatched hut, coexisted in a region where Etruscans had already moved upscale into. Timber and tile palaces set on platforms. Roman domestic architecture became a cocktail of local Latin patterns and Etruscan upgrades, until, later, Greek ideas about peristyles and courtyards joined the party. On the divine side, the Etruscan pantheon felt familiar, but not. Tinia, Uni, and Menra roughly mirror Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. But the Etruscan gods weren't just Italian Greeks. They had their own tastes and tempers, and were often consulted with a nervous reverence that rubbed off hard on Roman religion. Etruscan religion put a huge amount of weight on prodigies. A cow gives birth to something with extra limbs. Lightning strikes a temple. It rains blood. A statue sweats. The cosmos just sent a push notification. Roman annalists list long, anxious catalogues of these events, followed by lines like, Senate decreed a day of supplication. Etruscan haruspices were consulted. In 217 BC, after the disaster at Lake Trasimene, Rome went on a religious spree. Vows, games, rituals. It wasn't superstition for its own sake. It was state policy shaped by Etruscan manuals telling elites how to read and respond to cosmic feedback. Then comes the moment where the teacher turns the page too dramatically. Etruscan power peaked in the 6th century BC. They had a league of 12 cities: Veii, Tarquinia, Caere, Cerveta, Vulcia, Vulcinia, Caere, Arezzo, Cortona, Fieso, Clusium, Perugia, Arezzo, Cortona, Fieso. Backstabbing at others, they traded heavily with the Greeks, bought and adapted Greek vast styles, and had a maritime alliance with Carthage. Around 535 B, at the Battle of Alalia off Corsica, Etruscan and Carthaginian fleets fought Greek Phocians. The Greeks technically won the day, but were so battered they resettled at places like Ely. That fight shaped the Western Mediterranean map, and Etruscan sailors were a big piece on that board. But internal fractures, pressure from Celts to the north and Romans to the south, and the relentless growth of Rome kicked Etruria into a long fade. Rome took Baiae in 396 BC, after a siege of roughly 10 years. A brute force preview of imperial Rome that later writers credited to the quasi-legendary general Marcus Furius Camillus. Veii sat just 12 miles from Rome and was basically an Etruscan mirror city with its own wealth, rituals and ambitions. Absorbing Veii wasn't just land grab. It was cultural osmosis. Romans filled their city with Etruscan artisans, priests, artworks, and, bluntly, spoils. Over the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, Etruscan cities lost wars, autonomy, and eventually their language in public life. By the time of Cicero, 1st century B, Etruscan was exotic. Emperor Claudius in the 1st century cernered out so hard about Etruscan lore that he wrote a 20-book history called the Tyrannica. The work's gone, but inscriptions from his era show Etruscan families still proud of their roots, even as their kids filed into the Roman Senate. Here's the twist that keeps the story interesting. While politics erased Etruscan independence, Roman identity kept polishing Etruscan parts and calling them Roman classic. Triumphs continued with those purple robes and laurel crowns. Magistrates sat on the curule chair and had lictors clear the street. The city's sacred boundary kept tripping up generals, unless they waited for the triumphal green light, a ritual that kept the Republic and then the Empire neatly inside its religious bones. Roman architects read Vitruvius, who codified the Tuscan order of columns. Stouter than Doric, plain capital, a distinctly Italic vibe. They still decorated roofs with glazed terracotta antefixes. The Rome of Augustus Trajan and Severus still carried Etruscan DNA in its bones, even while the empire spoke Latin, adored Greek literature, and ran on taxes. And that's without even opening the case of the most Instagrammable artifact in Rome, the she-wolf. For a century, people loved saying the Capetonian wolf was a 5th-century Bess Etruscan bronze, big, expressive, terrifyingly alive. Then ScienceGate crashed the party. Thermoluminescence tests in 2006 indicated the bronze likely dates to the Middle Ages, 11th or 12th century C, with the twin babies Romulus and Remus added in the 15th century. Cue a lot of awkward throat clearing. The point here isn't to dunk on the old attribution. It's to show that Etruscan influence on Rome doesn't need overhyped objects. It survives in the quiet, proven stuff. The way the sewer bricks curve, the laws on offices, the rituals around a thunderstorm. Even the small things carry weight. The comitium in the forum where the people met was aligned ritualistically, and the rostra, the speaker's platform, wore ship prows as a flex after a naval victory. But the logic that politics needed a sacred stage and cosmic coordinates feels Etruscan at its root. Tanacule, the queen, who in legend recognizes the omen that a kid will be king, telegraphs how Roman storytellers thought about Etruscan women, perceptive, powerful within the palace web, reading omens with steel-trap confidence. Servius Tullius, allegedly a foreign foundling, who rose to kingship under her patronage, embodies an Etruscan theme too, merit stratified into order, with census classes and tribes. The lines between myth and record blur, but the cultural logic stays consistent. So what didn't come from Etruria? Not everything, because one culture doesn't puppeteer another. Rome's legalism and military machine had Italic roots and their own trajectory. The Latin language is Indo-European, not related to Etruscan. The Roman concrete revolution is a late Republican and early imperial breakthrough, with ingredients and techniques that go beyond anything in Etruscan building. Roman road building, with surveying excellence and standardized milestones, scaled to a level Etruscan city-states never needed. But none of that cancels the fact that when Rome was getting its act together in the 7th and 6th centuries BARS, The Etruscans were the closest thing to a cultural finishing school. The edges of that school get sharp with one more look at politics. Lars Porsena of Clusium, early 5th century Bas, marched on Rome shortly after the first Tarquin got booted. Roman tales give us Horatius, Cocles holding the bridge, and Mucius Scaevola burning his hand as a loyalty flex. Ancient historians debate how close Porsena came. Some say he actually occupied the city. What matters for this story is that an Etruscan king loomed large enough to terrify early Republican Rome. A century later, Rome was absorbing Etruscan towns. The pendulum swung fast. But the swagger Rome adopted, parade in a chariot, face painted like Jupiter, lictors, parting crowds, echoed the brand of kings whom Rome loved to hate, until it realized their brand was extremely effective at getting people to take notice. Even a Roman philosopher knew where the showmanship came from. Varro and later writers listed which insignia of office derived from Etruscan practice: the purple robes, the curule seat, the toga praetexta, the rods and axes. These weren't just clothes, they were constitutional theatre. In a world before microphones, the outfit told citizens what kind of power entered the forum that morning. Rome kept the stagecraft even after trashing the monarchy, because republics love costumes as much as kings do. The Etruscans invented the costume wardrobe. Rome wrote sequels. Now, because this is supposed to be a history that resists the temptation to go all in on one influence, here come the measured corrections. The grid city isn't strictly an Etruscan patent. Greek Hippodamian planning shows up around the same time, maybe a bit later in some cases, and Greek colonies in Italy like Paestum and Metapontum had their own versions. The triumphal rituals have Etruscan flavors, but they also smell Greek in places. A world of city-states shared ideas like teenagers share playlists. Roman augury, reading bird flights, was most likely Old Latin before it swam in Etruscan commentary. And the gladiators? That is best understood as a pan-Italic fever dream, with Etruscans contributing notable scenes and southern Italians providing others. An honest approach takes all of this on board and still returns to the scene of Rome, walking through the 6th century Bas, wearing an Etruscan tailored suit. Follow the material trail to keep the claims grounded. In Cerveteri's Banditaccia necropolis, streets of tombs unfold like a planned suburb for the dead. Drum-shaped mounds, tumuli shelter, multi-room spaces carved to look like houses, with ceiling beams sculpted into the rock and couches set for an eternal banquet. The tomb called Regalini Galassi, mid-7th century barge, exploded with gold. Fibulae, safety pin-like brooches, pectorals, and cauldrons with attached griffins, testifying to Etruscan, orientalizing taste for Near Eastern motifs. Rome's elite in the same era began shifting from huts to house temples. The cultural winds blew from the big Etruscan centers toward the Tiber. In Tarquinia's painted tombs, dancers whipped their hair in scenes titled with the strong simplicity of ancient explanation: Tomb of the Leopards, Tomb of the Hunting and Fishing. Life looks good, social, sophisticated, and very unlike schematics of Stoic early Rome. Then again, victors get to rewrite the vibe. Roman historians later emphasized rustic virtue while living in houses decorated with Greek myths and Etruscan-style architectural elements. The arts of war took notes as well. Etruscan armor, bronze helmets with crests, engraved cuirasses, turns up in tombs that blur the line between gear and status display. Roman military kit evolved in a shared Italic ecosystem, but Etruscan artisans provided some of the finest metalwork. The shield on the Roman coin, the inscription praising a consul, the metal behind it, the workshop tradition, the inlaid decoration, those grew with Etruscan hands. So why did Etruscan culture get the quiet ending, while Roman culture shouts across the ages? Scale. Rome unified Italy and then exploded outward. The Etruscan city-states never did. Their language, non-Indo-European and unique in the region, shrank as Latin became the administrative and prestige language. Tomb inscriptions in the 4th century BC still roll in Etruscan letters and words. But by the 1st century BC, Latin dominates the public sphere even in old Etruscan territory. By the 1st century C, Etruscan was, at best, a boutique language of memory. Claudius's history, now lost, might have saved much of the literature, if it even existed in bulk. Instead, what remains is archaeology, bilingual inscriptions, and the things Romans wrote about their teachers. The irony lands with every modern misattribution, corrected by archaeology. A medieval she-wolf becomes less Etruscan, and somehow Etruscan influence becomes more real. It's in the shape of how Romans thought. That masks matter, that ceremonies need choreography, that temples look best on podiums with wide porches, that a city starts with a sacred boundary line, that the outfit carries the office. It's in the early deities of the Capitoline Triad and the terracotta color scheme of the earliest monumental architecture. It's in the sewer that made the Forum civilizable and the racecourse where power showed itself under the eyes of a screaming crowd. It's in the Roman alphabet's bones and the Roman numerals' fingers. Now for the sly observation every viewer deserves. Rome bragged forever about being practical. In practice, that meant talent scouting neighbors, copying what worked, and calling it tradition. This is what makes Romans the least insecure culture that ever lived. Borrow a Greek god. Rename it. Borrow an Etruscan ritual. Codify it as Roman law. Borrow a Carthaginian naval trick. Turn it into a Roman fleet. There's genius in that, but there's also honesty. The early stage of Roman civilization is Etruria's workshop. The Romans never forgot that. They just stopped talking about it once their own brand got big. Artists and objects keep that memory stubbornly alive. The terracotta heads from sanctuaries at Pyrgi and Veii. Their eyes slightly too wide, and their smiles just a bit too firm, feel like they are about to demand sacrifices or start a conversation. The bronze votives from sanctuaries show hands, feet, organs, and anatomical offerings dedicated for healing. The piers and bridges around Veii include the Ponte Sodo, a tumbling subterranean tunnel for a stream, a piece of landscape architecture with the audacity of later Roman waterworks. These weren't rustic stage props. They were statements of technical competence and ritual command. Ritual timekeeping wrapped up one more thread. Etruscans divided the heavens into 16 regions. Roman augurs adopted that map when they templated the sky for auspices. From that, Roman magistrates learned when to delay a vote because thunder rolled from the wrong quarter. Not superstition. A schedule. The model liver from Piacenza ties that sky map to the microcosm of a sacrificial organ, giving a literal thing to touch when teaching a student priest. That tiny bronze, about the size of a hand, whispers that Etruscan religion wasn't just ecstatic ritual, it was organized knowledge. Rome loved organized knowledge. Then there's the swagger of elite funerals. An odd carving here, a painted scene there. And by the time funerals in Rome needed public wow factor, the blueprint existed. 3 pairs of gladiators at the funeral of Junius Brutus Pera. In 264 bears watched by a shocked, fascinated crowd, became dozens, then hundreds, then a fame machine of blood and spectacle that made emperors nervous. That pipeline runs from the fursu with a dog and a bound victim to the Flavian amphitheatre with velites and murmillos, and the overwhelming smell of oil, sweat, and fear. The origin story remains debated, and Etruscan claims can be overstated, but funerary games as a path to public sport is an Etruscan Italic inheritance, with Rome's signature scaling up to 11. Music slides through all of this. The double pipe tibia trilled through rituals, processions, and street life. Trumpets, straight tubes, called tuba, and curved corna, blared at armies and games. Etruscan musicians show up painted on tombs with stylized hands and carefully depicted instruments. They were pros. Roman public life kept them booked. Triumphs, sacrifices, funerals, theatre. The soundscape of Rome, horns at dawn, drums before a race, flutes drowsily tuning on a temple platform, comes into focus because Etruscans turned ceremony into performance art. If a dramatic mic drop is required, it should land on the day 509 BICE when the Republic was born. The Tarquins fell. Rome swore off kings, but the new consuls walked into the forum in Etruscan gear, with Etruscan numbers at their back. The Senate still met in a curia shaped by archaic ritual boundaries. The biggest temple in town was a Tuscan showstopper, made by an Etruscan artist. The city's biggest crowd magnet, the circus, carried the DNA of Etruscan race culture. The priesthood, waiting to interpret a weird storm, had Etruscan textbooks, a republic wearing a king's wardrobe, just with the pockets turned inside out, to prove they weren't stealing, became the accidental mascot for Etruscan soft power. The tale wraps with a gentle admonition. Whenever a civilization looks impossibly complete, as Rome sometimes does, it rarely sprang fully formed. It metabolized its neighbors. Etruria was the neighbor with the best kitchen, the most dramatic table setting, and the hottest playlist. Ancient sources keep dropping the receipts. Livy on lictors and regalia, Dionysius of Halicarnassus on rituals, Vitruvius on temple plans and the Tuscan order, Cicero on divination and religion, Pliny on pigments and triumphs, modern archaeology, Massimo Palatino's foundational work, Mario Torelli's studies of sanctuaries, Nigel Spivey's surveys of art, Mary Beard's takes on early Rome, traces the hands that made the things. When that evidence aligns across inscriptions, ruins, and texts, the credit gets easier to allocate. So the takeaway plays out like this. Rome mastered empire, law, and infrastructure. Etruria taught Rome how to city, before Rome knew how to spell it. The pipes and drains, the regalia, the theatre, the sacred geometry of public life. These are Etruscan fingerprints on the marble of Roman identity. The Romans did what great adapters do. They walked through a neighbor's house, tried on a robe, took a seat on a folding ivory chair, looked in the mirror, and saw themselves. They weren't wrong. They were just standing on a borrowed rug, and the rug really tied the room together. Our journey through history continues with Day in the life of a Athens citizen. Your city pays you to judge your neighbors and rows to war for silver, but it does not pay you to vote. You step into a democracy that runs on rumor, olive oil, and the terror of Spartan spears. The Parthenon above you glows like a brand new marble flex, finished barely a handful of years ago in 432 B. It looks white from a distance, though the experts with ladders swear it wore color once. Blues and reds punched into friezes, and the gold ivory Athena Parthenos shining inside. You live in a state where one motion of the hand on the pegs decides alliances and grain routes. While your wife cannot set foot there to cast a vote, your servants haul water from public fountains that your taxes and other people's tribute fund. Freedom for some, work for many, and a navy that eats silver like a hungry god. Dawn slides in over the long walls to Piraeus. Roosters, charcoal, and the hiss of a tiny brazier snap the morning awake. You wash at a terracotta basin, splash on olive oil from a small araballos, and scrape with a bronze strigil, because soaps are a Roman fever dream you will never meet. Breakfast comes like every normal day in Attica for people not named Alcibiades. A kratisma, a chunk of barley bread, dunked in watered wine, maybe a fig, maybe an onion if you feel like clearing a room. Wheat loaves exist, but barley is the workhorse. It keeps you moving and nobody complains out loud, because nobody wants to look like a Persian-scented aristocrat. The city's coin sits in your pouch, in neat, clinking hierarchy. 6 obols make 1 drachma. 100 drachmas equal a mina. 60 minas stack into a talent. Thucydides writes about hundreds of talents of revenue every year in this century. And it feels believable because the city is spending like a festival king on marble, ships, and jurors. You tug on a simple chiton and wrap a himation because mornings cut a bit cool in spring. Sandals, if you own them. Bare feet, if you forgot. Either way, the road does not care. The house breathes inward toward a courtyard. Shutters cracked. Sturdy mud brick walls take sunlight like a shield, whitewash trying to keep the heat honest. The andron, the men's dining room, waits for evening. The women's quarters float behind that thin line of domestic privacy. All men insist on while leaving everything to the women to manage. Measured by dowries and obedience, according to every self-satisfied oikos manual. Xenophon will eventually write a whole treatise on this stuff like it were. How to household in one easy scroll. But you already live it. The loom clacks in rhythm. The jar of Zeus Cortesios, your household storage spirit, sits in a corner with a rope charm tucked around it. At the hearth of Hestia, the flame stays steady. The door thuds open to the real city. You do not emerge into a glittering avenue. You step into alleys that drift, lanes as narrow as grudges, houses bumping shoulders, chickens darting like sanctioned chaos, broken pottery underfoot, the kind archaeologists will thank you for 2.5 millennia later. A herm stands on a street corner, a squared pillar with the head of Hermes and a carved phallus that would scandalize a later century and serve as just another normal landmark in yours. It marks the spot and prays for luck. Those faces look down on you everywhere. Do not break them. That never ends quietly. You move toward the agora, where even the dust carries news. The Panathenaic Way rolls straight through, a chalky highway for processions and merchants and every kind of opinion. Off to one side rises the hill of the nymph, the Areopagus, crouched like an old hawk, where the aristocratic council used to call the shots and still controls murder trials and sacred stuff. On the west, the Pengs, your open-air parliament, with a view. The line of men climbs the slope like an amphitheatre of humankind. 10 tribes mixing in single file, Clerics shouting order, Scythian archers in funny, pointed caps holding a rope smeared with red dye to push lingerers towards civic duty. The rope is not a vibe. It is a fine waiting to happen. Your neighbors show off stained tunics to no one, because not attending the ecclesia, when summoned, looks bad and costs coin. The rumor board has updates scribbled in cut-stone decree style. You recognize the shape of the owl tetradrach praetor, flash around stacks of figs and amphorae. Athena's profile looks right, olive sprig behind, little crescent sliver. That coin weighs around 17 grams of silver, and everybody from grain dealers in the Black Sea to spice traders in Egypt loves it. The mines at Lorient to the southeast, with shafts like ribs in the earth and slave labor deep in toxic brilliance, feed that mint. When Themistocles told you all, in 483 beats, to invest a Lorien windfall into ships instead of individual payouts. He chose your future. More than 200 triumphs by 480, rowed by 170 souls, each built into a wall of oak and iron that beat Xerxes' huge fleet at Salamis in 480 bars. That victory still buys moments of swagger on bad days. You breathe in the pinks, stone benches, rock beds of seating, improvised, honest, the kind of place that cannot always host the entire citizen body, but lives with that. Adult male citizens number maybe 30,000 to 60,000 in these decades, if you count widely. 6,000 is a magic number here, required for certain votes like ostracism and grants of citizenship. The ecclesia can run leaner for ordinary business. 4 meetings per prytanes, usually 10 prytanes per year, according to the city's lunar calendar, each prytanes from one of the 10 tribes. Today, the board of prytanes sit in their purple cloaks, like authority in human form. They use lots and rotation, so no man can crown himself king for long. One lucky officer, the epistates, gets a day with the state seal and the keys to the treasury and temples. You nod up toward the stone bema where speakers will try to carve the air into policy. The water clock clinks below. A herald calls for silence and the gods at the start. No microphones, only lungs, art, and a lot of hubris. People brag on this place as pure democracy, but you know it's fine print. Plutarch and Aristotle later will write names like Solon and Cleisthenes into legend, but citizen meant adult male born. To citizen meant adult male born to citizen parents. After Pericles, by. No metics, no slaves, no women. Metics pay the Metoican tax, 12 drachmas a year for a man, 6 for a woman, plus the privilege of never voting. Slaves build your ships, run your errands, sew your sandals, and get counted as property. Women manage your household down to the last pop shard and get counted as honored ghosts in public life. The platform up there is a stage for one half of reality. The order begins the way it always does. Sacrifice, smoke, prayers, the standard curses for traitors and bribery, repeated by rote. Then the agenda blooms. The clerks unroll a tablet with a list like a heartbeat. Tribute reassessment from the Allies. Grain shipments from the Eugene. Reports on the fort at Pylos, where a chunk of Spartan hoplites embarrassed themselves in 425 by. Discussion of war, pay for rowers because that keeps your hulls moving. Business about the cavalry, the horsemen who cost drachmas to keep fed and stabled and look pretty in parades. A decree or two, with that terrifying rule that any citizen can prosecute a proposer later under the Grave Paranomon if the decree violates existing law. That particular nightmare shows up in the late 5th century as a way to police bad motions. You feel the pressure. Vote now. Vote now. Pray someone down the road does not sue you into exile for being persuasive. A man you recognize begins with the "who wishes to speak." No megaphone, no podium, because this is not TED. It is Attica. The herald quiets the crowd, and the word waves roll down the slope. Speeches are timed. In the courts, a clepsydra approves or murders rhetoric. Here, social rhythm and the herald do that job. Men of means have their names ring out like bronze. Demos listened to Themistocles in another decade. Now they listen to whoever can sell policy like salted fish. In the 420 spies, this means names like Cleon will take over airspace. Your friend talks grain, and you start counting in talents. At the start of the war, Thucydides writes, "The city had 600 talents a year in tribute from the empire alone, plus income from customs and lorien. 1 talent equals sex, null, drachmas. 1 drachma pays a skilled worker for a full day of sweat. Do that arithmetic and watch the empire turn into a navy, a jury, and a set of marble temples. The vote comes like weather. No written ballots here. Hands go up, a wave of human focus, and the presiding prytanes, with their prodre, eyeball the mass and call it. On big days, or for things like ostracism, you will scratch names on ostraskark, broken bits of pottery, and dump them in jars under the agora's watchful gods. 6,000 shards of the same name means a vacation for that man. 10 years with his property intact. Aristides got the blow in 482. Themistocles in 471. Simon in 461. Hyperbolus later in 415. It sounds like crowd madness to outsiders. To you, it repressorizes public life without swords. In these years, the graph paranorman begins to replace ostracism for telling people they are out of line. Ostracism is not chaos. It is quarterly purging of political headaches run through ritual. You step away at last, sun already bumping up toward noon. No attendance pay for this performance. Assembly pay arrives only in the early 4th century, under Agirios. So the 420s. Leave your wallet unpampered. Courts pay. Juries pay. Soldiers and rowers pay. Policy making on a weekday costs you time and bread. You get your reward in the agora, where the market unfolds like a Greek chorus of wants. Stalls with olives, cured in amphorae. Pungent garlic strings double as anti-friend spray. Leather from metic tanners, who always smell like economic growth. Bronze works that try to be art, and usually end up as spoons. The air is all cumin, smoke, and fish. Always fish. Always the smell of endless Athenian fish mania. The Opsan addiction described and mocked by comic poets. Eels from Lake Copes come in wrapped like celebrity guests, a rich man's treat that ships aristocratic bragging rights inside a culinary cliché. Sardines line up cheap, sold by the hundreds, anchovies glistening like little silver drachmas you can eat. Tuna is the star. You hover like every man who can tell the difference between last night's catch and something that saw daylight under Solon. You have enough coin for lunch, and the day needs salt. Bread olives, a hunk of cheese from goats with better hair than most politicians. You dip everything in wine, because undiluted wine is barbarian behavior. Greeks mix wine with water, 3-1, 2-1, civilized ratios to keep everybody conversant, instead of murderous. Even symposium nights obey that rule. Imagine a crater, a mixing bowl big enough to drown a careful argument in, and a symposium that slips into Kottabos. The classy art of flicking wine dregs at a target while you pretend this is intellectual networking. The flute girls, the singing boys, the recline on clean eye. Aristophanes throws elbows at it all, and you love him for it, because nothing deserves reverence forever, not even your own tastes. But wait. You hear the clatter of wooden nameplates on bronze pins, and your afternoon just got swallowed by the law. Jury duty. 6,000 citizens, chosen by lot at the start of the year, become dikastai, jurors, the beating legal heart of the city. Panels can range from 200 and one up to a ridiculous 501 or more for truly epic cases. Today you line up in your tribe, hold your bronze identity ticket, your Pinakian, and watch the Clearitarium, the allotment machine, work its cold magic. Rows of slots, each filled with a name, a tube with black and white balls, a randomizer before Vegas made it tacky. A black ball means the whole row stands down. A white ball means the row goes to the panel. Arbitrary clean, admired by political theorists in barbershops for generations. It bleeds the poison of manipulation out of court composition, or at least makes everyone pretend it does. The usher pushes a set of bronze discs toward you as you take your juror seat. Aristotelian scholars later will obsess over these like numismatists. At a coin fair, one disc with a solid axle, one with a hollow axle. One means convict, the other acquit. You hold them in your hand with finger curled, so nobody sees which is which. When you drop one in the urn for counting, the other goes in a separate jar, so the officials can confirm your participation. Aristotle's Constitution of the Athenians, chapter 69, will detail all of this, because Greeks love instructions as much as they love arguing. The litigants begin. No lawyers in wigs, no professional prosecutors with Latin phrases, and a billable rate. Citizens prosecute citizens in public suits, called graphi, or bring private actions called dike. Liturgists take the stage sometimes because money buys time to write speeches, or hire a logographer to ghostwrite your sincerity. Think Lysias in a few decades, crafting something that sounds like your inner voice when it is actually his invoice. The water clock drips out each side's time. You envy it for knowing how to stop. There are witnesses, oaths, sworn over, chopped up boar. No cross-examination in the modern sense, only more statements and witnesses. The panel hums at any mention of stealing public money. The city pays jurors now, in the 420s, 3 obols per day, half a drachma. Cleon pushed it there, and comedians made a living about 3 obol jurors. Aristophanes' wasps produced in 422 bes. Sees the old man Philocleon, addicted to jury pay, like a retiree who lives on court glory and stubbornness. You laugh with the joke as you finger your pay token. The coin bankers will exchange it later in a little ritual of copper, bronze, and pride. 3 obols is not wealth. It is lunch, dinner, and a way to say you are part of something larger than your patch of dirt. Money, honor, and boredom pinched into one duty. You file out of the court as the sun slants. Another case down. Another decision that will echo in this city of scribes and public stones. Everything of consequence gets carved into steel. Tall marble with letters that look like they were stamped with law itself. You can walk a week of your life just reading them. Tribute lists from your allies. The Delian League, gone from protective coalition to Athenian empire over the course of this century. Igai 3 is what later scholars will tattoo on those stones. The city's accounts show insane numbers, lines of silver and grain and warships. This is the empire's audit report, and you live under its math. The road pulls you toward the gymnasium, because oil and sweat belong together in Greek. The Academia Grove to the northwest will bloom into philosophy later. But even now men gather in sun and shade around the palestra's dirt rectangle with its polished columns and punch of laurel. You strip to nothing and grow into your culture. Running under the olive trees, wrestling in dust until the mouth tastes like Attica itself, discus with the economy of a wolf. Javelin thrown like sending a letter that murders. The trainer stands with a stick and a voice that says, more in a single nod than half the speeches on the pags. You oil again. Scrape again, dust turned into a paste with sweat. Conversation runs parallel. Protagoras visited this town in the 440s and carried around a reputation for explaining how people seize truth. Gorgias drops in with purple elocution. Socrates wanders and tests everyone's surety without a fee. A lifelong public service that will go very badly for him in 399 bars, in another century of the city's calendar. You hear names and ideas sound out in the lazy menace of a late afternoon. A school without tuition appears at every shady wall. You cut off toward the long walls like anyone raised on sea power. 2 parallel stone arms stretch down to Piraeus, 5 or 6 kilometers of pure strategic stubbornness, built in the 450 s BC and reworked repeatedly. A logistical spell that keeps your city wed to its port year-round, no matter who parks a hoplite army in your field. Spartans love to show up in the Thracian plain for a barbecue of unharvested barley and think that wins wars. You made that tactic pointless by turning your polis into an island attached to a harbour. Grain can still cross water when the fields burn. You think back to the plague waves of 426 BC when everyone squeezed inside these walls, and the air soured, and Thucydides wrote it down like a man with a diagnosis of human panic. You still light small offerings for the dead at family shrines and turn away from the memory. Down at Piraeus, the smell hits like money. Tar and hemp and sea. Ship sheds line the shore in straight ranks. Wooden ribs in stone garages, 30 meters long triremes that hum with built-in tension. 3 banks of oars, 170 rows, 30 sailors and marines. A bronze ram that does not care about lawsuits. You run your hand over a hull and feel the future. Naval pay draws men from the feats class. Your poorest citizens without enough property for horses or armor. And they become the engine of this democracy. A triarch, a wealthy man, will be assigned to fit out a ship for a year, a liturgy that can burn through thousands of drachmas and buy him a line of civic bragging rights and enemies. The mist blurs out. Salamis Island, sitting there like a trophy room. The offices tally the port tax, the 5% import/export duty with a cute name, the Pentecost, that skims coin off every amphora and stack of hides. This place is your lifeline. Cut it off, and Athens goes from empire to indoor debate club in about a month. But you also live among gods. Every corner stops you if you let it. Small shrines distract like children. A little statue of Hermes takes a honey cake. A sour smell of wine from a libation warms the ground for heroes. The Panathenaic Way has wheel ruts carved by centuries of carts, and every 4th year the great Panathenaea processes in a wave of music, metics, citizens, girls carrying baskets, athletes glistening. A new robe for Athena, a peplos woven with stories of gods and giants, carried up to drape on her sacred image. You stop today at a nameless altar because everyone does. The city and its gods get a share of everything. The sacrifices feed the poor, make the festivals happen. Let the calendar tick through months like Bedromian, Poseidian, and Thysterian. Your city keeps time with wine, war, and weaving. The agora winks from up the hill with something shinier than fish. You head back that way and take a side path most merchants ignore. The Stoa Poikile stands there, the painted Stoa, with scenes of marathon and myth flowing along its long interior wall. Men lean on pillars and talk at a pace that attracts students by gravity. You are never more than a few feet from someone running a private school out of a porch. The civic offices hold court, like kitchens of logic. You look at the magistrates in the Tolos, the round building where the current Prytaninais dine at public expense and keep the city's continuous heartbeat. They sleep on pallets inside during their face, because the government does not like to wait for coroners or sunrise to wake them in a crisis. You walk past a tax farmer with a face like an abacus, and a stonemason with forearms like columns. You slow at the pottery quarter, the Kerameikos, where artisans bake red figure craters with black varnish that gleams like wet olives. Painters lay out Achilles and Ajax, Heracles and centaurs, women at looms, men at symposia, little scenes you recognize because this is your life, just with heroic lighting. Clay here breathes myths at a price anyone can pay. The Dipylon Gate looms. Outside, the road to the academy and to Eleusis runs. Inside, everything and everyone you care about. By late afternoon, the light hits so hard, it turns marble into time. This is the use case for a nap. You shrug inside your courtyard, throw a cloak over your head, and surrender to a half hour in which 2,000 years of academics will not know exactly what an average Athenian did. The daily life sources do not brag on naps the way they brag on war and finance. You drift anyway. Grain merchants argue outside your window. Somewhere in a nearby house a girl sings a weaving song. Somewhere else a man rehearses a court speech with the kind of whisper that counts as domestic terrorism. When you wake, the household turns to the dapnon, the evening meal. It is not the Victorian 7-course thing a future empire will insist on. It is family. Bread, relishes, maybe some boiled cabbage or lentils, that enduring Greek stew of pulse and dignity. Salted fish elevates the repetitive into the beautiful. Fresh fish makes the evening a festival. You drizzle honey if you have it. You chew olives 3,000 years into the same practice. If friends arrive with the right level of polish and scandal, the symposium follows the deitnon, a second act for conviviality. The andron opens. Couches arranged in half moons, a crater in the center, wine diluted with water because memory exists, and you enjoy tomorrow's clarity. The cup circulates left. Libations to the gods, to heroes, to the dead. A small boy carries around water for hand washing and counts to make sure everyone gets a share, because fairness is not just for ballots. A lyre plays. The conversation floats between politics, snark, inventory of who snubbed whom, a recitation of Homer by someone with lungs and ambition. The Cartabar's target in the corner waits for the inevitable moment when eagerness outruns dignity and wine dregs try to knock it over. No invented speeches fill this room. You have heard enough real ones today. You think instead about what you already know so hard it hurts. The myth of freedom is simple to explain and easy to love. A city of equals under law, voting on war and peace, in assemblies under the sky, and carving their births and deaths into stone for all to read. You also live with the footnotes. Citizens only, male only, property class counting more than it confesses, the empire leaning on allies' taxes, and enslaved people caught in the machinery everywhere, from Larian to dinner service. Ancient democracy is messy. It is also mind-blowing. You walk unannounced into rooms and change state policy with your hand in the air. That is not feudal Europe. That is not a Near Eastern monarch. That is not even a Roman Senate pretending to share power. You know the myth sells, and you also know the receipts. Aristotle's Athenian constitution lays out the boards and cogs. Thucydides shows you what war does to minds and morals. Aristophanes writes you into comedy and slaps you lovingly for being gullible. Another myth dissolves for you tonight. The one about whiteness. The Parthenon, your pride, is not a sterile white cube. The masonry sparkles at dusk like bone, but its surfaces would have glowed in color. Pheidias' Athena Parthenos. Inside the cellar, almost 12 meters tall, gold and ivory, a spear that could double as a mast. The pediments talk at you in stone. West pediment, Athena and Poseidon throw down over Attica. East pediment, Athena's birth from Zeus's skull with gods in attendance, like a VIP lounge. The metopes with lapiths and centaurs, brawl in a freeze frame of barbarism versus civility. The freeze wraps the building. 160 meters of cavalry and citizens and gods, all rolled into one long Panathenaic day. Your city says, on stone, what it cannot stop saying in speeches. We, the people of Athens, are the story. The drama of mortals and immortals happens at our address. That attitude built ships and enemies. The story of Spartan invincibility takes a body blow when you remember Sphacteria. In 425 Bus, after a siege, 120 Spartan hoplites surrendered to your lot. A number Thucydides lists like a trophy. Sparta's first team soldiers, men raised from the cradle on black broth and pain, handed shields to Athenian rowers and walked into captivity. The ideology of hoplite masculinity cracked right there. Your city traded those men's existence for leverage almost everywhere else. That does not mean Sparta rolled over. It means your navy and money broke the old script. You pin that in your memory as you pass a wall where some idiot scrawled, "Sparta has good laws." You shrug, like a man with a fleet. You tuck your juror's token in a jar above the doorway, next to small terracotta gods and a sprig of olive whose scent never quits. You shake 3 obols into a little pile and do mental math without shame. A skilled worker might earn a drachma a day. You, as juror, did half that, plus honor. A trierarch will throw thousands of drachmas at a trireme. A talent is 6,000 drachmas and buys a small politician. The state sometimes calls for an asphora, a property tax in wartime. And that started in the 420s, when war turned longer and nastier than planned. The poor supply bodies, the rich supply silver. Ideology thrives because both feel useful and needed. You walk outside with a cup of watered wine and look down the hill where the city spreads, like coins thrown on a table. The Pnyx is in shadow now, and its stones still hold the heat of your feet. The Areopagus glows at the edges. The Muses have their hill, the nymphs theirs, and your gods take hills like cats take windowsills. The Acropolis stands high, the Priapelea's monumental gateway making your spine straighten just to glance at it. The Parthenon's lines are so correct they make you want to sell something expensive. The columns bulge in the middle, entasis, that small correction that turns visual truth into actual truth. The city never stops teaching its citizens to think about proportion, balance, measure. Moderation shows up even in stone where politicians cannot drown it. You decide to walk one more circuit because night in Athens is rumor and cool air. The market stalls pack up in a practiced dance. Men with lamps walk carefully, like they are holding down the night with light. A priest closes the doors at the small temple of Hephaestus up on the hill, the Hephaestion, which latecomers will misname Phoenician for centuries. Its Doric columns look like they showed up at the gym. A small group heads toward the city gates for a funeral tomorrow at Kerameikos. War, writes the calendar, even if the festival says no. The funerary stele stand there, with names and carved scenes of quiet dignity. Hands gripping hands in farewell. No gore, just memory loaded into stone like a song in marble. Pericles' funeral oration from 431 Bess still rings in your ear sometimes, even though he is 2 years dead. Thucydides gives you his voice in clean prose. Later, the city honors the dead. The city shares the grief. You turn back toward home and pass the Tholos again. The Prytanes inside are probably chewing on barley bread and committees. Every day, 50 men in rotation learn exactly how endless this job is. The bull of 500 sits over them, chosen by lot, 50 from each tribe, preparing the agenda, massaging proposals, making sure decrees move from noise to stone. If you serve, you feel the grind. 1 year out of your life, and you never stop reading. That is the point. The city pulls everyone into its gears at some point. Not because Athens hates leisure, because it hates the idea of anyone else making the decisions. You see a metic friend lock up his shop. He cannot vote. He delivers bronze work to temples and rich men. He pays his tax and lives here because the city's gravity bends everyone's paths. Trade lives because Attica lacks nice timber and too many big rivers. Build a harbour with 3 harbours inside it and watch the world show up. You tell him you will send a boy with coin for a new hinge because door noises age you. He nods and smiles with the weariness of a man who has been a citizen nowhere and a contributor everywhere. He will need a citizen sponsor to do anything formal. The city controls the gates of belonging with deliberate strictness. Aristotle later will write this down like a recipe. It does not feel like one when you are on the outside. You get home just as the stars pick their spots. The moon backlights the hills and gives the Acropolis a reason to be smug. You pour a last libation on the ground, a few drops for good fortune, and step through the door. The house knows how to hold in coolness and keep out noise. The courtyard is a temple to doing nothing after everything. The women have already arranged tomorrow's wool, the warp weights hanging neatly on the loom. A clay piggy bank sits fat with your child's stash of small change. Those little obols and chalkoi have names and destinies. They will fund a snack stall on a festival day, or bribe a friend into taking your spot in the sun at the next assembly, or spark a fight over Kottabos, bragging rights. Your daily money has a better memory than marble. Before sleep, your mind runs a final inventory of the historical hot takes you cannot say out loud because the city punishes smugness with swift mockery. Your grandparents won at Marathon, not because they were superhero farmers, but because everyone stood in phalanx and did their job, and the Persian line lost stitch and will. Themistocles saved you all at Salamis because he preferred naval contracts to land war gravestones. Cleisthenes' tribal reforms, after 508 bars, made sure family and neighborhood power had to filter through a new grid. 10 tribes cut across the old aristocratic loyalties, the demes listing out citizenship like a ledger. Democracy survived because it learned to love randomization. Claritaria in the courts, blots in the boo, rotating boards, the epistates for a day. No one gets to build a little monarchy out of a long meeting. Food piping hot with myth also cools under evidence. No tomatoes, ever. So the salad you once wanted in July belongs to a continent that does not exist yet in your maps. No lemons, no oranges. Citrus arrives centuries later. You sweeten with honey. You preserve with salt and brine. You live with goats and sheep. You do not know pasta or coffee. You do not miss them because nobody told you to. You eat barley bread, figs, grapes, olives, onions, cheese, pulses, seasonal greens, fish, whenever possible. Meat is festival food, or rural opportunism. Boar hunts exist, but aristocrats always own the best stories about them. Athenian dreams smell like grilled sardines and thyme. Olive oil serves as food, fuel, perfume, lamp, lotion, and wedding gift. You would trade half a poem for a good amphora. Fashion keeps it sane. The chiton, shoulder-pinned, linen if you can afford it, wool if you cannot, the himation in cool nights, sandals when you walk to Piraeus, bare feet when you remember why people regret inventing shoes. Beards go in, and out of style, the way names drop off Ostraka. Hair gets curled sometimes. Athletics keep everything else in check. Men exercise nude, which terrifies the time travelers peeking through your window and bores everyone else, born within 50 miles of an olive tree. Women's clothing swishes and covers. You register gender in silhouette at 50 paces. You also register which houses have dowries that look like supply chains. You blow out the lamp and let your eyes adjust. Night is not quiet. Dogs patrol. A flute somewhere drifts on the breeze. The Scythian archers do a half-hearted loop around the agora. Bows that rarely see string, walking symbols of the city's monopoly on legitimate coercion for market closing time. The moon picks out the grooves in the street, ruts cut by centuries of traffic, rain gutters carved like someone loved geometry. Your bed is a simple frame with a stuffed mattress that knows the shape of your back. You think of the ships again because Athenians do that, counting triremes like some people count sheep, until you see glistening oars in your mind and doze. The city will wake you early again tomorrow. The ecclesia might meet again soon. The courts will fill. The ships will slide out of their sheds. The liturgies will be assigned to somebody with too much money and not enough plausible excuses. Somewhere, an inscription cutter will hammer another decree into marble, each letter trenched like a promise. Aristotle, in a century, will outline this whole patient machine. Thucydides, writing about now, will file your worst moments alongside your highest ideals, insisting the reader be better than the actors were. Aristophanes will give you the health of laughing at your power. The stone will outlast the jokes, but the jokes keep the stone honest. You are a citizen of Athens in the 5th century bus. Your day starts with barley and ends with watered wine. You raise your hand to vote on other people's fates and then go home to a house built by hands that cannot vote at all. You carry 3 obols earned for judging a neighbor, and you count an empire's silver on your fingers. Your city teaches you to think by making you responsible. It refuses to let you be an audience. It drags you, caffeinated only by sunlight and civic pride, into the center of decisions that will outlive you. You do not write footnotes. You live them. On the highest rock, Athena looks south. Ships tick on the horizon. The owl's eye glints on every coin, round and heavy. A breeze moves across the pangs, still warm. The gods can keep their ambrosia. You have barley, votes, and a seat under an open sky. The lamp goes out. The city hums. The night, like your democracy, runs on trust and habit, and a stubborn promise you renew without ceremony. Every time you step outside in the morning and walk uphill toward the bema,